this meeting of the Joint Fiscal Committee. It is just about 9 o'clock, and our first item is to approve the minutes from our September 27th, 2023 meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Yep.
All right, so Rep. Kornheiser moved approval, and a second by Senator Cummings. So we had multiple, I guess. So our first, after approval, what?
Do we vote?
Yes, we can vote. Sorry, I'm sorry. I have to tell you, I am in the midst of a migraine. So
sorry.
I am, in order to function, I have to take medication. So if I'm a bit fuzzy, I apologize. So thank you for saying we need to have a vote on the approval of the minutes. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Anyone abstaining? If not, then the minutes are approved as drafted. The next item is the administration's fiscal update. And our first witness here, I believe, is going to be Douglas Farnham. And he is here in person. So, thank you.
We all look at it in the same direction rather than in different screens.
I know. Sometimes you're on the screen, so it wasn't. So thank you. As you can see, we have a topic for you to brief us up to date. You've been immersed with the work of the flood recovery because of your new assignment. It's nice to be sort of the floater administrator here, so.
Multifunctional.
Yeah, so thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
So for the record, Douglas Farnham, Chief Recovery Officer for the state. So yes, the flood, so I'll walk through some of the ARPA numbers first.
Those in front of us, I'm sorry.
How many materials?
Oh, I've lost my identity.
Wait, I'll go after it.
Jeff is having a terrible.
I know. There we go.
Sorry. I realized maybe we should start, you want to start with the ARPA report and reallocations. That's number one. I don't know. I don't care which order.
Right. I have high level numbers for where the ARPA figures are right now. I didn't transmit those in a document because there's very few of them, and they quickly become stale since it's a moving target. I know that the Finance and Management has been works with Joint Fiscal Office on that bigger, more detailed spreadsheet. And I don't know if that version has been updated due to the timing of this meeting yet, but I know that's something that's updated, generally speaking, on a monthly basis.
I did, just as a comment, I did send out the report that was given at the last meeting to all the relevant committee chairs. Of course, that report shows a lot of money that has not yet been expended. And there was a caution in there that just because it hasn't been expended doesn't mean that there isn't work underway or money obligated. And last year, we ended up with one committee saying, oh, we've got this money, it hasn't been spent, without fully understanding that the work was underway. And it was just, that startup time. And so what got reallocated had to be unallocated. So we don't want to have that happen again. And so for us, when we come back, the real utility is what money is available based on everybody's best thinking that has been appropriated, but in fact will not be spent and is available for reallocation. And so I'm stating this publicly because we need to caution people to say, oh, well, you've got several hundreds of millions of dollars that have not been spent. But to say that's available is absolutely not the correct assumption. Knowing what that amount is for us to reallocate is obviously going to be very critical if we are to make sure that every dollar we receive gets obligated and doesn't go unused, so to speak. So we look forward to that report, but we know it's difficult to compile. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Douglas, I'm trying to remember now from the sheet, you gave us this nice 3-page last time that we have disseminated, and then at the bottom line, not because it's left over, and I agree with our chair here, that the ARPA dollars have all been appropriated out, and you gave us a lovely chart with a column with where it's cited in law, so people can look at the language that associated with that particular allocation or appropriation. What I still haven't gotten an answer to is whether or not do the feds view our appropriated as being obligated?
Right.
Because that's the concern around December 24, that it has to be obligated. And
I believe, so we do have a clear answer to that. I thought we answered it before, but the feds do not consider appropriation to be obligation. Obligation is the existence of a grant or contract. And one thing a lot of the states are working through them with payroll in particular for any funds that are going to be like limited service positions that are going to need to continue to administer programs in 25 and 26. We haven't gotten a straight answer out of the feds on specifically what does it take to consider future payroll to be obligated. Mm-hmm. And so we intend to take a position with those that, you know, we'll document which positions we intend to fund with ARPA limited state fiscal recovery in 2025 and 2026. So we'll document that, and we'll document the intention to fund those positions. And then we'll argue that that is our obligation of those monies. But the question of whether or not a state appropriating it is considered obligation has been answered by Treasury in the past that no, that doesn't count.
that was my understanding too.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure. And I know that with the arrangement that's now within that 637 million that's on the bottom line still, and I'm sure that that has changed even, that was about a month ago, and it's probably hopefully less now than was there, was it gave us, meaning the state, the opportunity that if needed, the ability to reallocate, as the chair has mentioned. And I don't know, and we'll look forward to hearing where that, if and what is available for that purpose.
Right. So what I can go through the high line numbers after questions are done.
Rep, what is it?
I think I would also just ask to consider if there are departments or agencies that are having trouble administratively moving resources out the door that are obligated, that you call attention to those so we can problem solve together sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Sometimes resources are needed to release resources.
right. I do think that is that's definitely a historical pattern that I've noted in some of our programs, is that we don't always build in the appropriate resource planning to move the funds. So that's something where the legislative language didn't prohibit it or didn't speak to it directly. The administration encouraged the use of up to 5% to cover those administrative costs and make sure that that they actually, you know, were able to move the funding. I think the resources to move the funding at this point have been less of a bottleneck than the overall process and engagement timelines in our regular state programs. And by that, I mean the grant application timelines, the back and forth with the municipalities to define and determine what the right projects are. I think traditionally it takes us a couple of years to move funds. And that's why, especially infrastructure related funds, and about 60 to 70% of our package is infrastructure related, making it move a bit more slowly than we'd all like to see.
And I guess I think at the end of the day, that's also a resource issue. And it might be like, a human resource issue of thinking creatively about how to move resources more quickly, but it's still.
I would agree with the representative that it's a resource issue. I don't think, actually in this case, I don't think it's as much of a state resource issue as much of a partner resource issue.
Heard. Thank you.
But if there are administrative obstacles or something that needs to be modified, I guess the message is we stand ready to take whatever action is needed to to ensure the money goes out wherever it's been appropriated, or if we hit a brick wall, which occasionally we do, and the money's available, then how it'll be reallocated. So, any other questions on that issue? Did anyone, further questions? Otherwise, I'm going to go on to the flooding.
Well, Madam Chair, I can, there are a couple of high-level numbers that I can share from the quarterly report that was just finished.
Oh, sorry, I'm moving you along too fast.
And then I can also share some of the strategies that may help with what we were just talking about. So we had the 1.05 billion, so 1,050 million total scope we're talking about here, right? At this point in time with Treasury, we have 940 million of that formally budgeted to projects. And what that means is that the department or agency that's administering has done enough of the planning process and the program definition creation that they have formally started that program. And so what that $110 million gap tells us is that at this point and I looked into it, there are still a couple major programs that they don't have the project budget fully fleshed out because they haven't entered a major stage of granting. The biggest one of those is the Municipal Energy Resilience Program. That has done the mini grants and has been moving the application process forward. The flood, because BGS played such a central role to flood response recovery for the state complex, that did definitely delay the work on launching the $500,000 grant phase of that program. But the nice thing with that particular gap is that it is a revenue loss replacement program, which means we have options to help us avoid the negative side effects of the 12/31/2024 application deadline and the 12/31/2026 expenditure deadline. So we can protect Vermont from losing those funds for that program without changing the actual use of those funds in any way from the original legislative intent. So even though that program, the main bulk of funds, isn't moving on the timeline that we'd like to see to finish by 12/31/2026, that's actually a very low risk, and it's something that the administration can manage. So it's more of an awareness that program isn't getting money to the municipalities for those weatherization improvements as quickly as we might like. But a big part of that also is that at least 100 or more, about 180 municipalities have FEMA claims in and are working on those FEMA claims. So they're focusing on that right now so that they don't avoid, and I know I'm blending the two subjects now, but
that's how the world works.
that's how the world works. So they are not necessarily focused on a grant program that we can delay.
Priorities in terms of what they work on first.
Absolutely.
The FEMA is more time.
So that $110 million gap of project budgeted with Treasury, the most part, I would classify that as a low risk indicator. It's not exactly where we want it. We would want to see that fully budgeted at this point in the cycle. And we can correct that over the next couple of quarters. Moving on to the next really important highline number, we now have 676 million obligated. So meaning that formal grant or that formal contract has been established. And that's one of the bigger numbers for the 12/31/2024 deadline that's coming up. Now, looking at that, out of that 676 million, less than 40 million of that is actually in the revenue loss category, because we created those revenue loss programs. Generally speaking, we switched that status last year. And so that a lot of them are more recent programs and are up and running. So even though we have 676 million obligated, About another 200 million of that, we have a workaround that would allow us to basically flip a switch and consider those monies obligated before the 12/31/2024 deadline, meaning we're close to 850 to 870 million out of the 1.05 billion being safely obligated. Then another thing that's hard to pull out of those numbers is that, as I said, payroll on the treasury reports won't show up as formally obligated. On the treasury reports, it shows up as obligated and expended at exactly the same time. We have around 80 limited service positions being funded with ARPA state fiscal recovery funds to help run those programs and in general, create general permitting capacity and other things. So that money will, on the treasury reports, will never show up as formally obligated ahead of time. Even though I know we have, three years and, a month and a half left of funding those positions in many cases. Not all limited service positions need to run through that 2026 deadline, but some of them will because they need to run to the completion of the program they're supporting. So we're working on forecasting how much those positions require so that we know, hey, 50 or 60 million of this money in the long term is needed to support the administrative costs. And that number was probably too high. I think it's lower than that. Well, then we'll document that in a memorandum, and that will allow us to feel better about the gap between the current obligation figure and the total obligation target. And we can fill that in with Treasury. I think there's a lot of states pressuring Treasury to release a clear position on how payroll is obligated. And to this point, they haven't been willing to release clarity on that subject.
Anyone have questions so far?
Little one, I appreciate that you're trying to give us the most up-to-date numbers possible, and that's why you're working off a piece of paper. I cannot retain numbers that you say to me out loud, and so it would be super helpful if you're able to follow up with something written.
It's like peeling an onion. You're saying we started out with this, this is, we've got to set aside this for the limited service positions. We've got, this, whatever. So I think,
As well as I take notes, I can get it wrong.
yeah. So, but you said we're working joint fiscal and
Yes, so
so maybe there's something that we can get between.
So the resources that will be available on the ongoing basis, the detailed by the appropriation kind of tracking spreadsheet that gets updated periodically, the annual report based on the numbers through June 30th. So the numbers I'm using are already different than those. That annual report was published at the end of July. And we're very close to publishing a shortened, dramatically shortened version, because that report is over 200 pages. And we're publishing a version that's around 30 pages that captures a lot of these numbers on an annual basis. So that'll be a good resource going forward.
I'm sorry.
No, yes, go ahead.
When you say soon.
The final proof was approved. The final proof was reviewed and approved last week. So it should be getting published in the next week or two.
Thanksgiving.
Before Thanksgiving, it should be. It was published in early September last year, but we prioritized it publishing that report behind the flood work.
Put that on our Thanksgiving reading list.
That one, it's one of those more abbreviated reports that has graphics. It has the figures. So it's intended to be much more legible than, I think the phase we're in right now is making sure that we have a language accessible version that can translate much more easily. So we're producing kind of the very detailed visual version, and then we're producing one that has a much more accessible version for anyone that has accessibility issues.
And that report will be helpful. I will send that out to the other committee chairs as well. When that updated summary becomes available.
And so, and the other thing that will be made available to the committee is, and this is a good crosswalk of the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is enough, but at a programmatic level, it's enough, right? If you want to look into any of the programs, Justin Kenny posts he posted all the detail behind the treasury reports to a SharePoint site that is publicly accessible. And that would allow you to take a particular program and look at, okay, I see that they've got 30 million out of $150 million obligated. What are the obligations for that program? So you could get an idea for what grants have been committed to, and what they look like. That data set will be, he usually is able to update that about within the next week or so. So that's another resource that'll be available before Thanksgiving. It's moderately legible. It's federal reporting data, so it's not the easiest data to work with, I'll admit.
So I just, not so much a question for you, is I'm just gonna flag it so I don't forget it, because we're coming in on December 19th and 20th, and Aaron, that sounds like we had roughed in like to hear about ARPA, but that might be, that 30-page briefing. So you can help us, not right now, you can help us decide, because you come in and brief us.
Yeah, I would be absolutely happy to go through that report. I think it's intended to be an easier status update.
We'll get it to archive.
And then you indicated, along with other states, how to deal with the personnel costs and the way that the feds recognize them. In the end, we do have mechanisms where we have actually substituted permissible use for general fund activities to free up general fund that we have total flexibility. So if we need to, I'm asking you this, I assume that flexibility with the funds that we're talking about would have that same potential to make sure that we have the money to pay pay the staff. The question also is around the limited service. Are we able to hire? And I guess this gets back to Rep. Kornheiser's question, because hiring and we know the workplace is really loosening up, and hiring is becoming less of a challenge. But one of the other things on the municipal level, it's how much capacity they've got. On the state level, our capacity and the positions and getting positions filled. Could you just give us a status report in terms of the success in filling the positions that are needed?
A lot of the positions did take a good amount of time to fill. I would say, the positions that were created in 2021, they did take a while to fill. The labor market was still very tight at that point. In 2022, 2023, we definitely saw a lot of easing there. And by the time we got to 2023, we had over 80% of those positions filled. And at that point, I stopped checking. Once we crossed the 80% line, I was like, okay, we've got, there'll be some churn. And basically told people to tell me if anything goes wrong from this point on. And nothing has come back to me as a concern in the staffing side. So it took a year and a half to 2 years to reach a substantial fill rate. But we did hit that. And I think that's one of the hopes, that even though we are behind the curve on some of these expenditure and obligation figures, we should see that start to catch up. I do believe if we hadn't had the flood this summer, we would have seen more catch up than we have seen. We saw the obligation figure between June 30th and September 30th increase by more than $100 million. So that's a very positive indicator. But the expenditure figure on June 30th was $294 million. On September 30th was $334 million. So we only saw $40 million expended between July 1st and September 30th. Again, we could try to guess how much of the impact on that was from the flood. There was likely some impact because a lot of the same staff were redirected. But that $40 million, so say we extrapolate $40 million of expenditure a quarter, that's not sufficient to get us to the 12/31/26 deadline. So there's two things that help us with that. And this gets into your question, Madam Chair. About $200 million of revenue loss is still left to go. So again, our bogey, I guess, would be around $500 million that we need to expend by 12/31/2026. In order,
I'm sorry, I don't know what a bogey is. I know it's affiliated
Sorry.
something about golf, but I don't know what it is in contest.
sorry, our gap or our target,
Thank you.
right? We started 334 million expended at the end of September 30th of 2023. So we have 2 years and 3 months to expend the remaining 716 million. We can take 200 million out of that target because it's revenue loss, and we can administratively execute a grant agreement to a third party, expend those funds, and from a treasury perspective, they've been obligated and expended. But the state program continues to run as it was designed by the legislature. So a lot of those monies are in Efficiency Vermont, weatherization programs, climate change programs were not really explicitly allowed under the federal rule. So we had to use revenue loss capacity to allow those programs to move forward. Our housing programs, like VHIP, part of that used revenue loss, part of it was able to be executed under the Treasury rule because it dealt with the homeless population, and there were allowances for that in the rule. So our gap essentially between now and the end of 2026 is 500 million. One of the administrative tools we have to work around that, which I'm hoping to present a more detailed presentation during the session, is payroll replacement. We use payroll replacement to change out just under $10 million of ARPA funds, as the chair said, to basically free up general fund to achieve the legislature's intent. We have about $47 million of payroll replacement capacity per year.
The state does.
The state does. And we've only used 10 million of that in fiscal year 23. So we haven't used any of that 47 million in FY 24, 25, 26, or the first half of FY 27. So that gives us over 150 million of capacity to swap funding around to allow a program to achieve its original intent without worrying about the timeline. So that brings us down to roughly 350 million.
No, we're peeling the onion.
So that's our real critical figure, that over the next 2 years and 3 months, we need to spend 350 million or more to be at a reasonable, manageable risk level. Ideally, we would get well above that so that we're not having to be worried about any money going back to Treasury. But I think if we hit 350 million, we should be able to manage it so that we're not sending any money back to Treasury. So if you carry that back on the timeline, we should be at or below, we should spend at least another 100 million before the end of 2024, preferably 150 million. So that $40 million expenditure figure from the last quarter, it was higher than we've seen in previous quarters, but that was also a summer expenditure figure, right? And that's part of our construction season. That's when we would expect the number to be higher. So I think we are in our general position with expending ARPA funds. We're at what I would say a medium risk level. We're not so far behind the curve that we'd have to do dramatic things to move money around and make sure that we aren't going to be left sending money back to Treasury, but we're far from being able to feel comfortable with where we are on the spending and the progression of our programs. I think we're still in the close monitoring phase. And the 2024 legislative session, I do think we'll hopefully be able to agree on tools that will allow for out of session management of those payroll replacement swaps in particular. And how we make sure we can protect over the course of, I think 2024 is the most critical time period, right? Because we have to have our obligations, our spending plan essentially locked in with Treasury.
For clarification, when we're talking about 2024, are we talking about fiscal year or calendar year?
Right. Calendar year 2024 for Treasury purposes.
We're throwing it around. And
right.
I know that people listen to, the testimony. I just want to.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent clarification, Madam Chair.
That is exactly why it's been a little bit of a nudge in the bottom of my stomach that says, pay attention to December 2024. Things have to be aligned.
Yes. And I would say part of that management gets back to Rep. Kornheiser's statement about resources earlier, that instead of reallocating to new uses, I'm working on generating a better estimate. But we will want to retain some capacity to support the administrative activities before we start reallocating. And obviously that's still the General Assembly's course. This is just my opinion. But
It's helpful because it's giving people an indication of kind of the potential of what they had.
Right.
And so it's maybe your opinion, but it's sort of like an alert to us in terms of this kind of dynamic environment we're dealing with here.
And then one piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about here yet, and I may be taking up more than my fair share of time.
We have until, according to 9:55, so we still have a couple more. But finish up, please.
The last major thing I can say on ARPA right now is that AOA received $17 million towards administrative costs to try to fill the gaps where things didn't associate well enough with a specific program. Permitting limited service positions are a great example. We needed those in order to support a greater volume of projects to help move things through the channel, but they can't be very easily associated to any one particular federal project. So that's one reason the AOA appropriation was created. That $17 million is firmly oversubscribed at this point. I'm working on narrowing the projections to when it will run out, but that's one area where if funds do come up, I think it would be a consideration of, do we need to retain a certain amount of administrative capacity? And I'll do my best to bring a specific number that is defensible to the legislature of this amount should get us through our administrative needs through the end of the ARPA portfolio.
Other questions on that? Thank you.
And then, Madam Chair, on flood response, at this point in the process, we're starting to move into the medium and long-term planning. We've been working with the federal partners quite a bit, but in the short-term aspects, we still have a heavy project engaged with HVAC, heating units. There were over 270 households that confirmed that they had non-functional heating systems as of about a month and a half ago. We've worked with those households. We've resolved over 100 of those issues between a team.
Sorry, what was the original number that the 100 was a part of?
270. So at the initial outset, the flood damage reports, right, which reports all varying levels of damage, over 700 heating systems were impacted. We surveyed in October, and roughly 270 were still impacted at that point in time. It was one of those figures that was kind of changing every day.
So impacted would be totally destroyed to just needed some repairs?
Right. Some of them were able to be repaired. Some of them were, many are needing a full replacement because they were submerged. And in the worst situations, they were attempted to be repaired, so money was spent on repairing them that didn't actually work, and now someone needs a replacement. So we've helped resolve and track the resolution of roughly 100 heating systems at this point, leaving still over 100 households that are working through this issue with the utilities. The Green Mountain Power and other utilities stood up, working with the Vermont Community Foundation, they stood up a team to assist people in figuring out what they needed to do to get their heating system. But one roadblock we've found, or challenge, is that some of the households just have much more complex issues to work through than just their heating system. And so we've been identifying that population with complex issues, and we're working with Capstone to stand up a disaster case management system. And that case management team should be able to take over on December 1st. Because we knew that timeline was going to be so protracted, a couple of weeks ago, we pulled in some volunteers from across the state, about 7 volunteers, to act as temporary case managers. And they can't provide the full services. They can't help someone figure out their FEMA appeal. but just to help someone and be a sounding board and be support for people until we can provide them with more holistic case management services.
So we did reallocate money within public, excuse me, service. What's happened to my voice? For replacement energy efficient
Yes.
appliances and so forth. So can you just clarify the intersection of what you're talking about? And of course, winter is coming.
Right. So the $10 million that was reallocated for energy efficient replacements, those incentives, when we've been deploying the utility support, one of the teams is focused on low and moderate income households that are eligible for those incentives. And then we've sent the higher income households, those above 120% of AMI. So not actually higher income, just not eligible for incentives, to a team that is more of standard contractors or utility workers. So we've identified and connected those lower income households with Efficiency Vermont and with the incentives. However, in some cases, the contractors need the money in hand, right? And the household doesn't have the money in hand. The incentives are generally paid on completion of the project. So Efficiency Vermont has been working on a process workaround for that with a revolving loan fund so that they can move that work forward. So I think that those incentives are starting to move systems forward. The ability to pay gap for a lot of households has been something we're still working actively with the Community Foundation and Efficiency Vermont to solve. So I would say in some cases, we know what needs to be done, but the household just doesn't have the funds, even with the incentive factored in to make the repair. In those cases, we do have non-congregate sheltering program through FEMA with the General Assistance Program, and we have the transitional housing units that are being created at the Montpelier Golf Course. So we have other safety nets that are in place or that we're putting in place. But obviously, wherever someone can continue to occupy their existing home, we want to achieve that. The other complicating factor in a lot of this has been about half of the population impacted by the flooding been in rental properties, and federal incentives aren't available for repairs to renters. Renters can receive rental assistance to live somewhere else, but rental property owners are eligible for small business association loans. We haven't seen a very high uptake on SBA loans. So the BGAP program, which Secretary Curley will talk about later, does help rental owners.
Rep Wood has a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Farnham. It's distressing, I'm just going to say about the individual renter, individual homeowner. And can you tell us what percentage of communities have enacted long-term recovery committees locally? Do you know that?
So at this point, there was a map produced recently. I don't have it on hand. There were 9 long-term recovery groups created. Generally speaking, it's best practice to create regional groups. So there have been 9 created. They do cover the major areas of flooding. I know that of those 9, Berry, Up, and Montpelier Alive, I think, is the one functioning as the long-term recovery group. There might be a different brand on the long-term, but Berry and Montpelier each have their own long-term recovery group that's being established. And then there are other regional efforts. And there's a regional group that actually encompasses Berry and Montpelier, Central Vermont as well. So that long-term recovery group structure is critical on connecting with the disaster case managers. And then the long-term recovery group disaster case manager and the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund, they work together to try to plug any existing gaps, fill those that last line of defense against people that have gone through all the state and federal programs and still have outstanding needs.
So that you answered the next part of my question, which was about the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund and the Capstone, the program that you're setting up through Capstone for disaster case management. That's statewide, I'm presuming, with Capstone just serving as the grantee, or is that only for Central Vermont and Orange and Lamoille County, where capstone is?
It is in all of the 9 individual assistance declared counties. So for the disaster case managers.
Okay, so.
The Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund can choose to help any Vermonter. So that's a statewide effort. Addison County is probably the largest gap where there was no individual assistance declaration, but there were small and specific areas of damage, meaning there are some households in
They'll still be eligible under the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund.
Right, but, and we have been working on a workaround for that because the Disaster Recovery Fund relies on case managers to present them with, this person has gone through the entire process and they need a grant. We can't use our standard case managers because they're FEMA funded, so they can't be used to help people in Addison, unfortunately. So they have been working on providing citizens and residents of Addison County that case management support.
And can I just ask, how the last one, so how much money do we have in the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund?
The last I spoke with the board, there was $2.4 million there. I know that they have been in conversations with the Vermont Community Foundation, and the Community Foundation may choose to direct some of its donations towards the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund. They are providing they being the Vermont Community Foundation, is providing direct administrative support to the Vermont Disaster Recovery Fund. So they've been working very, very closely over the last 6 to 8 weeks to kind of build out the system for providing those last resort grants.
And if it may appear that the full $10 million might not be necessary in the efficiency Vermont realm, if that turns out to be the case, would you be recommending any of those resources be redirected?
Well, we took it away from weatherization, so I guess that goes back to
Weatherization.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
And relooking at
I'm just concerned that that fund is not, that there's insufficient attention being paid to that fund and individual assistance. And I headed up the Long-Term Recovery Committee in Waterbury, so I'm familiar with how that went during Irene. And this is very bifurcated. This is not, it's not family friendly. That people have to go to all these different sources for the state assistance. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
One thing I would say, Representative, is that the structure we're setting up is the same as that was built after Irene. So the disaster case managers are going to be that single point of contact for the family, just as we set up after Irene.
Okay.
So it feels different because we're in construction phase right now, but the goal is to have it be basically the same as the structure that we landed on after Irene, because we found that to be successful.
Okay. Yeah. There's going to need to be more than 2 point whatever million in that other fund. Thank you.
So other questions, do you have other information, or have you finished your testimony? I'm just looking at the clock, and we're now at a quarter of, and we have 10 minutes for the other 2 items.
I guess closing thoughts, Madam Chair, the last thing, I think the scope of this and the opportunities that come along with it, the public assistance claim to FEMA for Irene was $217 million. That resulted in $32 million of hazard mitigation funding. This event is going to exceed that $217 million. It's too early to say exactly how far, but I'm confident we'll receive more than $32 million of hazard mitigation funding, which will help us with flood buyouts, with river corridor mitigation projects, which I think will do a lot of good, just like the Irene funding did over the next 5 to 10 years. Obviously, the first 2 years we have to, and by we, I mean primarily the legislature has to decide how to deploy it. But then it will, we saw the last Irene projects finishing up just before the flood. So I do think there's an opportunity to do a lot of good with that money. And I think on the individual side, we're at over 23 million of individual assistance for this particular event. That actually puts us even with the individual assistance that was distributed under Irene. And that number continues to go up as awards are adjusted, as rental assistance continues. So this event actually was on the same scale or greater than Irene, but it affected more individuals and it affected more households, more residents because of the inundation nature of the flooding. So I think there will be a lot of financial conversations ahead of us, Madam Chair.
No, a lot of figures to retain. Other questions, Mr. Hahn? Yes, I'm going to move along and Sally Wonder. Is it here? Public? Is she on remotely? She's on Zoom. She's on Zoom. Okay. So now we're item number 3, EVT, Efficiency Vermont Flood Recovery Funding. So do you want to give us an update, Kelly? And thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm filling in for Commissioner Tierney. She couldn't be here today. Again, I'm Kelly Launder, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Efficiency and Energy Resources Division in the Department of Public Service. And I am overseeing a lot of the ARPA and other federal funding that's coming into the department. So as it's already been mentioned, the department was authorized in July at the emergency board meeting to transfer 10 million of the 35 million of ARPA funds that was originally appropriated to provide weatherization incentives and instead be used for replacement of flood damage and destroyed appliances and heating equipment. So I can get us back on schedule because it's a really brief update of what's in the memo. Efficiency Vermont launched the residential recovery program on September 6th. And as of November 3rd, had provided just over $300,000 in payments for 114 appliances, HVAC, and water heating equipment. And because it did come up, I wanted to mention that of the 114, 31 did go to rental properties. If there is a renter that is hits the eligible income, then Efficiency Vermont can provide these incentives for rental as well. So that's really all I have for my prepared remarks, but I'm happy to answer any questions if I can.
Now the amount that's been spent relative to 10 million is very modest. Can you sort of give us a sense of what you see ahead? There was an earlier comment, is the 10 million in fact going to be subject to the allocation? And that's, if so, where it would go. So can you just speak to where you see things? Is there a lot in the pipeline, for example, to give us some sense of spending to date relative to the 10 million?
Yeah, I unfortunately don't have information from Efficiency Vermont on what's in their pipeline as far as applications versus money and incentives actually paid out. So I can't answer that. I know, it's taking a little more time. For folks to move through the FEMA application process, because it was required that if people were eligible for FEMA, they had to work through that process first and their insurance first before they would be eligible for Efficiency Vermont incentives. So that's slowed things down a little bit. Now that the deadline for FEMA is over, people who did not yet apply and are not eligible to apply anymore because of the deadline can now apply for these funds. So we may see it picking up, but I think it's a little too soon to know. But yeah, we haven't talked about any reallocation at this point. We're just trying to see how fast the money moves.
Kornheiser?
The fund, the revolving fund, has that now been set up and is operating well so folks can get their utilities paid for in advance?
Yeah, unfortunately I can follow up in writing with some more information. I'll ask Efficiency Vermont. I don't know the details, so I don't want to
Thank you.
speak incorrectly about it, but I will send something in writing and ask them that question.
Thank you.
Questions?
Just thank you for actually providing the written that you have provided.
So we can second that.
So we are.
Yeah. If there's anything else that people think about that they would like information on, I will ask about the applications as well, so we know maybe have a better idea of what's in the pipeline. But if there's anything else, let me know and I'll provide that as a follow-up.
Yes, unless there are no more questions, Kelly, thank you very much for coming this morning and for providing us with that written summary. I don't see any more questions, so I'm I think we're going on to BGAP at this point, and Secretary Curley is here. Again, something that got reallocated.
Good morning, everyone. For the record, I'm Lindsay Curley. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And as you all may remember, at the September 21st Emergency Board meeting, an amendment to the BGAP program was approved that allowed the Agency of Commerce to recalculate awards and offer supplemental payments to businesses to aid in their recovery in a more impactful way. That program amendment meant that applicants who had 1 million or less in net uncovered damages were able to receive up to 30% of the net damages reported. We removed the cap of 20,000.
Sorry, do you have a copy of what you're reading from?
I don't know.
Did you see?
Apologies. I'm not sure if our legislative director submitted it. If she did not, I'm happy to send it over after.
Yes, she did not.
She did not. My apologies. Okay.
All right, we will get copies.
Yeah, happy to do that.
We'll post it also on the joint fiscal website so people can access it
Okay.
as well.
So we removed the cap of $20,000 at that same time. So applicants who had net uncovered damages of more than $1 million, we kept the cap of the lesser of 20% for $500,000, but we removed the FTE requirement and the property limit. So what you may recall is that above the 1 million mark, because they were so big, we had originally put in a threshold for FTEs. So there were like 1 to 10, 10 to 20, and so on. And then we also had a property limit. You couldn't have more than 3, you couldn't have more than 1 if you were over $1 million. So at that time when we came in, we removed some of those thresholds because we were seeing so much damage, but yet we still had plenty of money. So anyway, through that amendment, we were able to issue an additional 269 supplemental payments to businesses with net uncovered damages, and it totaled around $5 million more in grant awards. So these businesses did not have to reapply. They were already in the queue. They had received their first grant, or at least approval of, notification of, so they didn't have to reapply. It was tacked on. If they had already received 1 check, they got a second check. If they had not received the first check, it was added on and they received 1 check in the total of the 2 awards. So just as a reminder, the program started, the application opened August 3rd, and the supplemental calculations started on September 21st, and our application officially closed on October 23rd. In total, 596 applications were approved, so just under 500 businesses were helped for their damages, and 269 of those businesses received supplemental payments. That means the others who didn't probably already had hit a threshold, and even with the increase, it didn't move anything for them, right? They were low enough.
So we have a question.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Do you have a sense of how many of those were rental properties? Even just sort of what categories you'd put those businesses into?
We can probably get that for you, but I don't have that off the top of my head. Yeah.
That would be great, maybe with the other materials.
You're just in like sector, or you're just.
I'd go with sector.
Sectors, properties, ownerships. Okay, we can definitely dissect that a little bit better for you. Yeah. And we'll, like anything, we'll report out at the end to tell a better story about the people that we helped through this program.
Because this program we've already shifted it halfway through, it's sort of helpful to have updates so we can maybe foresee if it needs another shift.
Oh, okay.
Unless maybe there's no money,
Yeah.
then there's nothing to
I'm
shift.
waiting for is like the final number.
You're waiting for the drop there, right? So, and to be fully, transparent, yes, we have dispersed a little over $18 million. So we are at the point where we have about $2 million left to disperse. We are fully subscribed and then some. And when we made our calculations, what was in the queue already, we hit the mark. We knew that we would be able to provide a supplemental award and not go over. What did happen is in the final days of the application being opened, we had a flurry of applications, some big ones. And so what we've done is we have shut down taking applications. So once the 23rd hit, we shut that down. We're no longer taking applications. Those that came in are sitting in a queue. They've not been reviewed. But what we are doing right now is the ones that have not been paid that had been in, first come, first serve, which is what we had agreed to from the start. We'll continue to pay those out until we hit the 2 million. Right now, our best estimate is that we're just under 7 million over for what landed in the queue in those last few days. But like I said.
7 million over the 2 million.
Over the 2 million, yes. And as I mentioned, our plan was to stop at the 20. We would pay out first come, first serve. So as a reminder, the license plate sales, there's some money that is coming in from those. So, again, we'll continue to review and use that money. But to date, I think, that might be, it may be at.
I was going to say, I don't think there'll be 7 million.
Right. I just didn't want to, mislead. But anyway, so we feel that we will have the money dispersed by Thanksgiving, all of that paid out. And so that's where things stand at this point.
So it sounds like we have nothing to reallocate, and in fact, the number of applications exceeded available funding by about 7 million.
Yes, yeah.
Other questions? Yes, I'm sorry, you're starting to see, but.
Secretary Curley, so when the flood first hit, obviously a lot of things got devastated. And I remember Montpelier itself, the downtown businesses, saying their losses alone probably totaled 20 million. So, and I don't, that was probably a back of the envelope type number, but how much unmet need is still there? And it may not be an easy, you have max, if someone had a $5 million loss, you're only covering 10% of that through the max. And I'm not suggesting the state's responsible for all of that.
Right.
And do you get any sense from maybe the applications you didn't get because the owners just walked away? This is gone.
Right.
There's no amount of money that I can invest to rebuild. So,
yeah, so I'll take a stab at this. So our total, based on the applications, the sum of the damages that were reported was over $204 million. That's of those that applied that hit submit. The net uncovered damages, so backing out insurance that was, again, reported, known at that time, other grants that people reported they received, the net amount was $159 million. What we don't know, to your point, are those that said, for whatever reason, I'm not applying, for whatever reason, we don't have that. I do see Commissioner Goldstein is on. She may have something to add. But again, this is only property damage. We don't have the economic injury, and we all knew, right, we would never make folks whole. So this is the challenge and the hard part of this.
Property damage include inventory.
It does, yes. Commissioner Goldstein, do you want to sign into the record, or do you have anything to add?
Sure. No, I think you're on the right track. It was over 200 million in damages. The net uncovered was 159 million. And then when you subtract out, we're giving out 20 million, just to get a reference point, 139 million is unmet, just of the people that have successfully submitted our application. What I don't have in front of me, we did try to collect economic injury, but it is a very dynamic number. The longer they're closed, the more the economic injury builds up. So a harder number to collect, but we could also get that back to you if that's something.
And the experience was the SBA really was not the resource that we had hoped to support some of these businesses. I mean, that was part of the argument for BGAP was in light of the lack of assistance that entities were eligible for under SBA rules. So Brooke,
Commissioner Goldstein, I want to make sure that I heard you correctly when you said there was 139 million in unmet need, and that was just from those who have submitted applications for the program. Is that right?
That is correct. So in other words, when every applicant would enter in all their damages, then, and they would categorize it by inventory, equipment, machinery, real estate, leasehold improvements, and then they would enter what they received from insurance or expected to receive to come up with the net, the net damages. We paid 30% of those net damages. And so what you're left with when you think about it, if it's 159 in net damages and we're paying out 20 million, that's how I'm arriving at a 139 million.
39. And do we have any idea about sort of the gross numbers? So those are people who applied, and I'm presuming that there are people who have not applied.
Right.
Do we have any sort of gross number in terms of damages to businesses?
I mean, we're using that as our proxy for gross damages. I mean,
Okay.
obviously, we're not collecting everybody. I think in total, there are about 700 or so applications. We know that 1,100 businesses were damaged.
Okay.
One of the things that's tricky, and we had to go through this, is why it took a while, is people would enter damages and then we need to see some level of proof or evidence. And not everyone had that, right? So in some cases, it may be overstated, it may be understated. It's a proxy. I'm using that really as a proxy number, not that it's the actual.
Thank you.
any other questions?
If I can. Secretary Curley, obviously disasters hit everywhere. Florida goes through hurricanes. I'm familiar with Hurricane Ian in Fort Myers Beach, and the businesses there all got wiped out. Other states what do they do? Because it's the same FEMA rules that doesn't help businesses. Other than SBA loans, what do those states or areas do that you're aware of?
I'm not sure, to be 100% honest. I think that, I'm just going to say, traditionally speaking, when you own a business, you take on there's inherent risks, right? So people try to build supports around themselves with different insurances. And it's challenging, right? Because flood insurance doesn't cover everything. You try to have, a business disruption insurances. There's a variety of things that people try to build in. And you're never going to protect yourself from everything. So the really hard part about this is that we had COVID and people didn't recover fully from that. And then this slammed on top of it. So I think that in the past, when people have had natural disasters all over, there may not have been, state or federal help, so to speak, and people might have relied on local generosity like we have here, right? But I think that we all have been happy to try, all of us, to try to help here because we have witnessed, right, the fact that people just hadn't had time to build that rainy day fund up. But I think that other places have been in the same situation as us. There aren't, I've asked around and I haven't necessarily found another state government official that says, we have a pocket of money, ready to dive into when we have a natural disaster. Maybe they're building those now, but I could be wrong, but I haven't found somebody that has said that we have that.
Thank you.
Yeah, like you brought up Florida, and they had an emergency bridge loan after the big hurricane.
Yeah, those are loans.
Loans are more common, right? I should clarify that. But as far as grants, it's not very common.
Thanks. Other questions of Secretary Curley? You have, is that,
That's all I have.
if you could arrange for us to get a summary of the information that you provided, that would be helpful.
Absolutely, we will do that.
All right, thank you. So now we're going to move on. That clock is driving me crazy because the time hasn't changed. I mean, it's like, now we're moving on to housing. And as you can see, housing is really talking about the housing in a broader way. We've certainly been focused in our goal or our assignment is to monitor the June cohort and how that's happening. But that is really one piece of a much larger housing issue because obviously we have a shortage of housing for everyone. We're hearing people who can't take a job here in Vermont because they can't find a place to live. And obviously, without that capacity, then it's very hard to move people from that temporary benefit that got created with COVID. So hopefully today, we're going to start getting some information that brings us the kind of concrete data to really get a sense of the magnitude of the housing challenge that we as a state have. And so it's with that I hope that the information and the data that we're being provided can begin to give us and ultimately our colleagues, because we talk about housing and, you know, everybody is a priority, but, well, how big is that housing, you know, that box of need? And how do we address it in, I would think it's going to take every kind of tool and strategy to address the shortage that we're experiencing across all populations. So with that context, I don't know whether you all want to come up together. There's safety in numbers, so to speak.
Interdepartment, interagency.
So thank you all for coming this morning. We do have documents that you've provided. Yes.
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 Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm going to leave it up to you. I'm sure you've orchestrated who wants to start first, and we'll let you proceed and review not only where we are relative to the cohort, but really what are we as a state doing or going to be thinking about for actions that we have to take as a legislature to begin to create the framework to address something that is not easily done, and it's way beyond what we as a legislature or state of Vermont can't do. I mean, we're going to need every partner we can and every strategy, and so that's sort of setting the stage for the next session. So turn it over to you.
Thank you for helping. So for the record, I'm Lindsay Curley, Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. It's okay with you, I'd love to have everybody sign into the record so that for flow purposes, we can kind of go right through our presentation.
Sure. Yep. Alex Farrell, Commissioner of Housing and Community Development.
Jenny Samuelson, the Secretary for the Agency of Human Services.
Chris Winters, Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families.
Great, so I'll kick it off today. So again, good morning. Thank you so much for having us all here today. The administration is coming to you today to provide a more robust update, not only for the future of the hotel motel program, but our progress towards developing a plan to address the housing crisis more broadly. This work is part of what the legislature tasked us with during the end of the last session. And we've been working as a cross-agency team between ACCD and AHS. And the working group's been watching the homelessness numbers and looking at the current and previous housing studies and analyzing past and current housing trends and the data. This type of interagency collaboration to look at homelessness and the larger housing ecosystem has not previously been so closely tied together. But this housing crisis in this moment with a pandemic and a flood barely in our rear view demands that we bring our agencies together along with the rest of the administration and the legislature to find solutions to our shared goals in the crisis that we face. Before we dive into some of the data and further explanation, I wanted to share 3 high-level conclusions from our work over the last 3 months. First, we have an acute housing unit deficit across the spectrum of our state's housing needs that we can no longer ignore. Number 2.
I think we would concur.
Number 2, we cannot buy our way out of this crisis. We must motivate builders to move quickly, to create more opportunities for renters and homeowners in our most vulnerable populations with bold policy changes. And number 3, the solution to homelessness is permanent affordable units. Hotel rooms are neither permanent housing nor service-supported transitional shelter. As such, we recommend discontinuing further investment in the hotel-motel program. The result of our work has convinced us that under current regulatory, tax policy, and economic conditions that have evolved over many decades, that Vermont cannot solve our housing crisis at any level for any population by simply nibbling around the edges on this issue. We're very appreciative of the work that was done last session with the legislature to begin to address some of our housing development issues. And we look forward to seeing the fruits of that labor, but we know that it's not nearly enough. We must be more bold in our actions. We realize that pushing for bold change can create frustration and even fear, especially among Vermonters who are struggling to find or to stay in housing. And we know that the decisions that we make together have real impacts on human beings and their lives. It impacts cities and municipalities and the residents who call those places home. And I can assure you that we take this very seriously as we talk about these issues. Housing reports dating back to the 1990s forecasted the crisis that we face today. I want to emphasize the current moment that we're in and the importance of making bold change now. We don't have the ability to kick the can down the road any further, and I cannot fathom the idea that someone in my position or yours might still be having this conversation a decade from now. Healthy local housing markets are essential to achieving the goals that the legislature and administration share. These shared goals include addressing homelessness, retaining existing residents, growing the number and diversity of people who live here, and increasing state and local revenues to create healthy, safe, vibrant communities across our state. Vermont can only meet its community revitalization goals, particularly in rural economic centers that have experienced the biggest declines in workforce, jobs, and children in their schools, when we focus on creating a healthy housing market, generating more units faster, and creating opportunity for renters and new homeowners alike. So what is the data we've been looking at, and how is it informing our thoughts on policy, programs, and partnership between our agencies, the administration, and the legislature? As I'm sure that you are all aware, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency's 2022 gap analysis found that 30 to 40,000 more year-round homes are needed by 2030. Simply put, we are coming up short and missing the mark, even as historic funding is allocated to housing development. One example, last year, there were only 2,300 building permits issued, and that was the most issued since 2006, when there were 2,600 issued. So let us take a closer look at the unit generation rates. Despite historic investment through CARES and ARPA funding, there remains a large housing deficit.
Should we be looking at this?
We'll get there.
We're going to get there. Alex will take you through that.
Sorry.
I'll give Alex.
I'm skipping ahead.
No, it's okay. We're going to get to the.
We do not have that document.
that correct? Oh, I'm just reading up my talking points, correct. We're going to get to the pretty slides.
Providing the framework for the.
Yes, thank you.
In other words, we have a serious problem.
Yes.
And we're trying to get that reality of how serious it is fully understood.
Exactly.
I think that's probably your goal.
You are correct, and I'm almost to the pretty slides, which is good.
Okay.
So despite historic investments through the CARES and ARPA funding, there remains a large housing deficit. The fundamental issue is the combination of tax policy, energy burden, land use regulations, and economic conditions that are making decent housing less and less affordable or desirable to build. To better understand this issue, we need to look at each county individually. For a small state, our economic centers vary greatly, and a one-size-fits-all approach can make it difficult for our communities that are struggling the most. For an illustration of what we're talking about, I'd like to turn it over to Commissioner Farrell to discuss a recent data analysis that we conducted to help determine county-level housing deficits and needed housing production in those counties.
Sure. So we won't pull the slides up quite yet. I'm just going to frame it in a touch more. So the unit deficit analysis that you're going to see and the production factor, this accounts for the approximate number of units that we would need to close the current deficit. So in other words, this is a point in time count. This is not dynamic. This is what it would take to get to a healthy housing market right at this moment. And I'll give the definitions of that in a moment here. But so what that means is this doesn't take into account the need for additional housing for population growth, what we need for increased workforce, and it doesn't take into account housing atrophy that we know causes 2,000 to 3,000 units to come offline every year. Okay, so what that tells us is that this number, this point in time number, continues to grow every month, every year. So VHFA is going to do a more in-depth analysis as part of the housing needs assessment that looks at what does the state need for its housing goals between 2025 and 2030. That's mandated by HUD. So that'll provide some insight. In addition to that, the regional planning commissions are working with VHFA as well as the Vermont Futures Project, and they're going to produce numbers that give us targets that go successive 5 years out up to 2050. So we'll have some longer range targets as well that take into account those other more dynamic factors that we haven't sought to include here. But just know that that work is underway, so we'll have more to do later on. As Lindsay indicated, the current rate of public investment, though it's completely unprecedented, it's historic, plus the non-government investment that comes along with that, it's not going to get us there, and nor could we reasonably expect further state investment to get us there unless we see significant systemic reform. To get more specific briefly, from March 2020 through this fall, we've invested nearly $400 million into the development of housing. That was through my department, DHCD, through the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, and through the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Some of those were existing programs that funding went to, some were new programs. While we haven't seen the full results of that investment, and for sure over the next few years, we will really see the benefits of that massive investment, it's really clear to us that's still going to come up short. So the reason for that is projects that are being funded through the Community Development Block Grant that runs through my department, through low-income housing tax credit that VHFA administers, and through VHCB's funding. Those average costs per unit we're seeing around $450,000 and actually creeping up towards $600,000 in a number of projects. So you can do the math, right? We could invest $1 billion, and what would that yield? A little over 2,000 units. So there's something more substantial and more systemic that we need to do to address this. We can't just look to government spending. Investment is part of this, of course, but it's not going to get the job done if we don't also do these other things. So what we will see is just under 1,000 units come online in the next couple of years from funding like VHCB, CDBG, and LIHTC, and then an additional, I'd say 100 to 150 units per year from VHIP. And now VHIP obviously comes in at a lower cost per unit, but that's because that's investing in rehab. So to turn to the data, we just want to note up front that we know this isn't a perfect calculation, but we know that no perfect calculation exists. So this analysis, though, is consistent with what we've seen in reports for decades, including a 2014 report that was commissioned by the legislature, which the Shumlin administration administered. So we can dive into this afterward, and we're happy to answer questions, but I think what we really want to convey here is looking at the details of this data is important, but I don't think it's the most important thing. We want to try to get the big picture. We want to try to understand that this is a massive deficit. I'll also note this is likely a conservative estimate for a couple of reasons. We know that the U.S. Census Bureau, though it's the best data we have, and it's data that everybody can agree on, it almost always overestimates vacancy rates. And I can tell you just right now, you'll see the vacancy rates, you've got the slides in your hand. The vacancy rates that they have, A, don't share our experience on the ground. And B, anytime we've done a survey on the ground, we always find a lower true vacancy rate than the U.S. Census Bureau's data. Additionally, the U.S. Census Bureau actually now reflects, as of Q3 of this year, a much lower vacancy rate statewide than they indicated in this report. So we're seeing 3% statewide vacancy rate. That's the fourth lowest in the nation. You can compare that with New Hampshire next door. They're at 3.8%, so just higher than us. That's the ninth lowest in the nation. The homeowner vacancy rate in Vermont, you can see in your slides, hovers around less than 1 to about 1%. Well, according to the Q3 23 data, it's actually 0.3% statewide in Vermont. So, yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alex, for this. I've got a question around the vacancy rate in Vermont. We're all well aware of. So anybody or dealing with people to try to find places. But there was also an underlining. I know great data on the vacancy rate, but also the affordability rate. You might have a 2% vacancy rate, but if it's 100% not affordable.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you collect that, not just 3% vacancy rate, but what's the?
We do, and I don't have the data in front of me, but a good measure of that is what we call cost burden. And Vermont has one of the worst rates of cost burden, housing cost burden. And the definition of that is if you're spending 30% or more of your household income on your housing. And we actually have a severe or a high number of severely cost burdened households. That's 50% or more of your household income spent on housing.
So I only bring that up because if you are looking for a place in a 2% vacancy place, you're probably even shut out at another 50% from that, if not more, because of what you can afford.
The scarcity will drive up the cost.
That is exactly right, and that is, I think, a point that we're going to touch on here. So why don't we pull up those slides if you all don't mind, and so we can walk through this.
Doing that? Are you doing that? Okay, thank you.
And I just want to say, I appreciate that we're talking through the numbers so specifically. I think that's very helpful. And I agree that there are definitely some substantial underestimates here. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. I think everyone at this table already agreed that we have a massive problem and that this is around the scale of the problem or maybe more. And so I'm looking forward to the part of the presentation where we get to how many units do we actually need to build each year to close the gap. So.
Yes, thank you.
Better get out your hammer.
I have a question that came up at our caucus the other day. Vermont's population isn't growing. So why do we need so many more houses?
So there's a couple ways to answer that.
The treasurer actually sent out a summary that indicated, in fact, it is growing.
6,000.
Yeah, and so there was an earlier one that was like under 200, it was very small. So actually, we gained a lot during COVID, and then last year, when you add the 2 years together, it was a significant growth, which is also compounding.
Yeah.
the housing. But, so you've seen that data that we received from the, so we can make that available as well.
Okay, that will, because that question will come up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is correct. So that's one factor. We are finally starting to grow, which is great news. Additionally, even if we had stayed flat, what's happening is household size, the average household size is shrinking. So even if we were to have the same number of folks, you actually need more housing units to house them.
My street used to have its own school bus. There are now probably less than 5 children on it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and across the whole housing spectrum, including the homelessness folks, we're seeing there's such a need for single occupancy because a lot of these households are 1, maybe 2 people. I think on average it's 1.6 folks, something like that. I mean, that's substantial. So
I would just say I hope that that drives what we're doing to move towards more houses. In my community, it's virtually impossible. But when you start talking about stormwater runoff, you start talking about going through Act 250 and all of that, by the time you put it all together, you can't put together units for that. And we drive towards single-family homes, which we need, but it isn't particularly what the numbers show.
yeah, it's not necessarily efficient to build just we'll also note that the reason for we need new units is because to just catch up and stay net zero, we have to build 2,000 to 3,000 to keep up with the 2,000 to 3,000 that are falling into disrepair and out of the housing stock every year. We have the oldest housing stock in the nation here in Vermont, so that really weighs heavy on the health of our stock.
I would say, I agree with you, but our problem to solve from this building is going to be the other population by the hundreds and thousands that are shut out of being able to access that.
That's exactly right, yes. So, yeah, why don't we go to the methodology slide, which is next here. What we did is we based this on the folks that we know, the homeless population that we're aware of, and then in addition to that, how many units would be needed in order to establish healthy vacancy rates. So you'll see on the slide that we chose 5% as the ideal vacancy rate for rental vacancies. That's an established standard. Folks would generally say 5% vacancy rate. That's not always easy to achieve, but that is what a healthy market looks like. On the other side, the home ownership side, seasonally adjusted rate of 3% vacancy for the home ownership. Now, 5% would actually still be the ideal, but as you all probably looked ahead in your slides, we are so far from even a 3% vacancy rate on the home ownership side that we don't even know that that is something that we can ideally try to attain. So aiming for 3% would be a much, much healthier market than we have now and would likely be more attainable. Are there any questions on the methodology and the points you see here before we jump to the first number slide?
I'm just going to ask about the last point that you're making. That's up there. You have the units on the hotel, ending the hotel motel programs. You're adding those. So in addition to your 3% and 5%, adding those units in addition to that.
We're recognizing that there's a substantial number of people who are currently locked out of the housing market. And so we wanted to make sure in this case that we added in the units that would be necessary for them to get back into the housing market.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so why don't we jump to the next slide here? And
question? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
I know it's hard to see me when the screen is up.
Very little. You're way up in the corner.
So, the last line on that methodology says, recall there is a case-based analysis. Where can we find that information?
We can definitely get it to you. We've presented it before. We'll make sure that we add it to the slides. I don't think it's in this yet, is it?
I didn't see it anywhere else, but I'd like to see what that analysis looks like.
Yeah, we can definitely get it to you. What that does is it outlines the number of households and the household size and the household type. And it gets down to the county level so that we can better understand, as Senator Westman said, how many units do we need and what type of units. I think it's worth us acknowledging, a key point as we go through this is that there are policies, that's going to be our ask today. There are policies that are inhibiting growth. It will make us all a little uncomfortable when we have an emergency which is what's in front of us, to put aside some of those policies for a short period of time. But in order to address this issue, that's what we're actually calling for here today, is to get a little uncomfortable and see what we can do to really jumpstart this housing market.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we, all right, vacancy rates. And as folks have already indicated today, I think you all appreciate being able to see this at the county level, as I know we do, because to try to look at this as a statewide issue is sort of missing that there's a lot of different issues in different parts of our state. And you can just see it in both the home vacancy rates and the rental vacancy rates. So
I'm sorry, are these AHS districts rather than counties? Is that your system?
this is actually based on the groupings established by the Census Bureau. Yeah, it's a little funky. For example, Franklin and Grand Isle counties have fairly different needs as far as housing goes, so I wish they weren't grouped, but.
Just the source, I'm good.
Yeah, but I think it's helpful. It goes back to what Commissioner Farrell was pointing out today. The data that we have isn't going to be perfect, but it's going to continue to reinforce what we know and what our strategies.
And I just wanted the context. I'm good.
Yeah,
sure. So you can see that attached to these vacancy rates, there's also unit counts highlighting the need in order to get to a healthier vacancy rate. In the next slide, we're going to put that in greater context, but before we jump to that, this is where I really want to highlight that the rental vacancy rates you see on the far right of the slide, we know that those are high. We use them because it's the best data that we have that is broken out by county, but I gave you some numbers a moment ago and you all looked at these numbers, I think, immediately and said, I know it's lower than this. And you're right. So all that means is that this is a conservative estimate that you're going to see from us. And what this conservative estimate says is that we need about 6,800 units statewide about now. If we were to assume this is conservative on the vacancy rate side, well, you can easily see that being 10 to 11,000 units right now, not factoring any of the other dynamics that we discussed before.
Harrison, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I'm glad you acknowledge that these numbers look high, at least to some of us. I look at Rutland County, which has a serious housing issue like a lot of areas of the state. There's no way there's a 6% vacancy or whatever it is, 3.5, but even, no.
3.64.
3.6, but there's no apartments available, and it's getting worse by the day. And I'm wondering if this, whoever did the calculating, looked at units that maybe aren't habitable right now.
Right.
Our mayor in Rutland has said, there's probably 200 plus units built, ready, older stock, as you mentioned, but they're not habitable. They've been run down, they're let go. And I'm wondering, it sort of begs the question, why? People own these buildings, and obviously they can't make a buck renting them out and investing to fix them up. And, that begs the question, why? Have we made it too tough to be a landlord? I'm not looking to be a landlord. There's too many issues. And we saw it firsthand with the pandemic where, people stopped paying rent and landlords couldn't evict them. So have we made it that unattractive? Has the pendulum gone too far? And then on the regular housing stock, I don't know any empty houses that are happening. I don't.
I know 3 flood damaged ones though.
But I'm sorry. But that doesn't do us any good. And it used to be builders would come in and build a development of 20 homes, on a small street. I don't see any of that anymore. They were spec houses.
You're gonna love what I have to say later.
Yeah, so.
So what you're saying is basically validating everything that we're talking about is but you've got some issues probably around eviction, rental, support of people once they get the housing. So your comments and observations actually are bringing together a variety of questions, not only as it might mean to change but it's assurance of rent, eviction practices, bringing in populations that need support in addition to go with their housing, what you do with blighted properties that many of our communities are experiencing.
I'm not sure what he means by vacant property and the vacancy rate. Does that mean that I've got an empty apartment and I'm taking a month to clean it up and paint it? What does this mean?
Right.
What does vacancy mean?
So the US Census Bureau methodology is a little opaque, but the way it's been explained to me is it's essentially units that are available to be rented. And so I think there's some validation in that when you look at, these are Census Bureau numbers, but also the numbers I just cited are Census Bureau numbers, which I think we would all say.
What does that mean to be available? I've got 19 apartments. I have nothing right now, but I've had 2 in the last that have turned over. I had somebody ready to move in before the other person moved out, but I didn't sign leases until the place was ready to go. What does this mean?
I can get a clear definition from the Census Bureau. I would take it to be listings, thinking of listings.
I never list.
Right.
Well, then, how would they track it then?
Yeah, I don't know how they track it. That's what I'm trying to figure out what this is. And none of the people in my area that are the largest landlords, we never post anything now.
Might I suggest that we keep going with the numbers because.
I think we have to because we're obviously getting into more detail, but we can't lose a larger message here that even if we're not getting all the ones that are listed, we're still in a pitiful state here.
And
the key points in the next slide.
And I think that what you're all saying is, hey, the problem's probably bigger than this number's gonna show us. So please keep that.
Just jump in for a second.
Yes. A few minutes, I recommend policy.
I just want to speak on behalf of the Census Bureau and their very good work. They have very specific, margins of error and bands of uncertainty built into any report they have, which we're missing here.
Yes.
And so that larger band, especially when you're looking at data on the county level, I think tells a more complex story. And they have very comprehensive definitions of their methodologies, very deep in their website if we were to look at them. I think we are framing the problem, and I'm curious when the VHFA report and the other report you referenced are going to be available?
So the housing needs assessment, which VHFA has been contracted to perform, that will be available in May.
Okay.
It's updated every 5 years?
It is, that's right.
And the other one you referenced?
The longer range report that VHFA is going to be working on will likely be available later in the summer or in the fall.
Okay, thank you.
And
So why don't we go to the next,
I was just
sorry.
gonna say, having sat through a bunch of these, there is a perception, so when you're doing numbers, that if we stopped all the Airbnb people from being Airbnbs, we could solve the problem. And if we rehab what's there, we don't have to build anything new. And so I think those are the issues that are gonna get thrown up to us. When I have a feeling I know what some of the things you're gonna ask us to do are. And I think we need to be able to tell them, and I know VHFA has a Airbnb tracking system, something fairly advanced.
So when we get into more detailed committee work, that kind of drilling down.
That's gonna be a number we're gonna need.
Even if they were all brought on board, I get the feeling it's still isn't gonna
Not even
be.
touch the problem. So we did that analysis, we have access to that same data, it wouldn't get us close. And even if we did that in theory, I think we all recognize the broader economic implications that would be disastrous for our state.
So good starting point, but we're not going to lean on this numbers. Yeah.
Exactly. We should assume we went conservative here so that folks didn't look at us. We wanted to use the most agreed upon data possible so that when
You don't get into a battle over the data. But what you're saying is with the understanding of the limitations of the data that, and so this actually is the most optimistic.
That's right.
Starting point.
Yes,
And
thank you.
different areas will have different.
Good data. That's perfect.
And so to press that, why don't we go to the next slide here?
Regional? Or,
So what we've done is, based on that, we've taken the number of units that are required based on that previous slide, and so compared it to what those counties have produced in terms of new units on average over the past 5 years. I want to make another note here as to why this is further conservative, because the past 5 years have actually been an uptick in building permits as compared to the time period from 2006 to, well, I should say really from about 2007 to 2017. That 10-year stretch, we had extraordinarily low building rates, around 1,000, 1,200 building permits a year. So the last 5 years have been an uptick. So when we compare the units needed to the average units generated in the last 5 years, and that factor that you see on the side, that's what would the increase need to be to that average 5-year number in order to generate that many units. I'll point to Rutland County, an 11.1 increase factor. And so I apologize if this is going to sound like an over explanation, but I'm just going to make sure that we're all on the same page here. To use a square number, you see our statewide production increase factor is projected as 3.2 compared to what we've been producing on average. If we were to say there's been 1,000 units, just that's the squarest number I could think of, 1,000 units, that would mean we'd actually need to produce 4,200 units in order to close this gap. Now, obviously, we know it's far higher. It's about 7,000, and likely, for all the caveats I added, it's actually probably far higher than that. But we wanted to frame it in this way to show that we've made historic investments. We've done a lot. The Home Act was a great step forward, and yet we need drastic increases to building in order to reach these goals. And I say that because even if the Home Act results in, let's say, a 50% increase, even call it a doubling of activity, still not even close. So I think. That's right. And I realize I'm stating things that you all agree with, but it's useful for this to inform.
we agree with it, but we've never really had this level of detail to go with some, and of course, then there are certain assumptions, well, if you got rid of the Airbnb, that'll solve our problem, or this one strategy. Our second, but I think what this is showing is that the magnitude is not going to be amenable to one single.
And the reports have been out there.
It'll require a very complex series of solutions to solve a very complex, long-standing problem.
That's exactly right.
And there's been analysis done that the reference that the report that comes out every 5 years is a very thick, and it's been coming out for a very long time.
But it hasn't influenced the policy to the extent, I think, that is being presented today.
That's right.
And I would even, I think VHFA and VHCD have done a really valiant job of sounding this alarm for decades now.
They have
not always responded to it.
Yes, and I want to give prior administrations credit. We found reports from the Dean administration, Douglas, Shumlin, all those administrations saying this is something that is bad and getting worse. So you're absolutely right. I think this was the last slide, so we can probably.
Yeah. Oftentimes, when it seems too big to address, we study it. As a response that at some point catches up with you, sort of like underfunding pensions. We'll keep going. You don't-
I know, let's keep moving.
I think it's lunch.
In a moment, I'm going to pass it to Secretary Samuelson, but I just want to concur with what Representative Kornheiser just said, that this is going to take a number of approaches, and we all, looking at this data and just from feeling on the ground, we know we need drastic changes, and then we can't just look to government spending alone and say, okay, check that box. Let's give Alex, Laura, and Gus another X number of million, and then we'll solve the problem. That's not going to be the solution here. So I think we all kind of agree on the context of the data. So before we jump to policy recommendations, why don't I hand it off to Secretary Samuelson to discuss the hotel motel program and some emergency shelter solutions.
So you're going to come back to what you're recommending?
Absolutely. Give me the breather on this.
Okay.
As I get started, the first thing I want to do is reinforce the 3 key points that Secretary Curley made. And that really is, we've got an acute housing deficit crisis in front of us, as we've talked about. That those historic investments are only scratching the surface. We all have good intentions, but they're not getting us there right now. And because of that, Vermonters have been pushed out of, and some of our most vulnerable Vermonters have been pushed out of the housing market. And to significantly address that issue, we are going to have to address the housing unit crisis. And those strategies for addressing the housing crisis need to be at the root of what actions we take. As I get started, I want to take a moment to emphasize that homelessness profoundly impacts the lives of many Vermonters, including families with children, Vermonters with disabilities, working Vermonters, yes, and many of the people who we are talking about are working 2 and 3 jobs, older Vermonters, and more. All of these individuals and households deserve permanency that they're not getting in our current system. My heart goes out to the people that I've met experiencing homelessness and those that they need a home that's not a hotel and that is not unsheltered homelessness. To help those who are impacted, it is crucial that we address this issue candidly and understand that the key to solving homelessness is increasing the available number of affordable housing units. The root of the problem lies in the shortage of housing units, a shortage that's not only makes it hard to find homes, but has made the cost to rent and own a home out of the reach of many Vermonters. Because of that, I'm here today to make sure that we recognize that the housing vacancy rate that Commissioner Farrell just walked us through is directly correlated in a negative direction with the number of people who are experiencing homelessness, and is also directly linked to the cost of housing, which has pushed them out of the market. Both the executive branch and the legislature share the same goals to implement a plan that addresses the shortfalls of the current hotel and motel program and makes housing more accessible for Vermonters, and particularly the Vermonters that the Agency of Human Services serves. I want to be clear that we have tried a number of approaches across the state agencies, working between agencies, not just our agencies, but also working across the boundaries with other agencies and other departments in state government to help people transition to permanent and affordable housing. We've made progress, as we've mentioned, but despite the historic efforts and historic investments, which we'll hear more details about from Commissioner Winter in the space related to homelessness, we do not have an immediate solution for housing everyone. This again reinforces what we're here to tell you today, that we need to significantly change and expedite the creation of affordable housing units. We can't move people out of hotels if we don't have a place for them to go. To achieve our goal with this program and to move, we need to move much faster, and we need many more units.
We have a question here. Not so much a question, just again, yes, I think, in March, in April, in May, and throughout all of last year, we were all aware that homelessness is caused by a lack of housing, and that the folks who were in the motels weren't there because they didn't know how to find housing. They were there because there was no housing available. And so I'm really excited that that's being acknowledged by the administration. I don't think we thought there was going to be an easy solution for folks to find housing. And I'm looking forward to a plan that really creates housing and creates both temporary and permanent housing for folks who are without housing right now. I think that's, that's been understood broadly for quite a while now.
And that's going to need to be a bold plan. And we're going to need to go further, farther than we went even last year. And we're going to need to get uncomfortable. Without doing more to affect the unit creation, we're not going to be able to alter the status quo. And I want to talk a little bit about what that status quo looks like today. We have more than 1,500 households.
I do, but you might be getting to it.
Yeah.
This is great. I want to hear about the other side of the coin, which is the people who will be waiting for about the 4 years before this is built.
Yeah.
And what is our plan around
And
making
Commissioner
sure?
Winters will go into a lot
Okay.
more detail on that. But let me outline the problem here, right? We've been using hotels as an alternative to affordable housing units.
Yes.
We now have as we get into adverse weather, we will have close to 1,500 households likely in our hotel units. And we're not going to have enough hotel units this winter to house everyone who comes to us and is in need of a housing unit. This means that year-round, we are going to experience unsheltered homelessness as we have been seeing it. Hotel rooms at their core, I want to reinforce, are neither housing units nor permanent supported housing and shelters. The current motel model uses for-profit organizations without services. And this leaves people struggling, making it difficult for them to move forward. And in fact, what we have seen is that some are moving backwards and are guaranteed to remain in this unending cycle. The strategy was meant to be very short-term when we implemented it and as an emergency safety net, but it was never designed to be a long or even a medium term, and it's an extended solution. We did not anticipate that we would be raising a whole generation of children and youth who are living in hotels or motels, or that we would see our elders growing and aging in our hotel and motel program.
Yes.
I agree that it was not intended as a permanent solution. I don't know if anyone at the table thought it was a permanent solution. I'm curious, when you say that you didn't anticipate this would happen, what did you anticipate would happen?
When this program, I think the we is all of us, when the legislature implemented the general assistance housing program, the numbers that were using it were far lower. I think as we've acknowledged here today, we've had reports since the 1990s that demonstrate that we're not building enough housing units. And we've seen a slow and steady increase in individuals experiencing homelessness that has been exacerbated during the pandemic and is now pushed up against the capacity that we actually have in the hotels. But when this program was designed and when it was implemented in its infancy, many, many years ago and prior to the pandemic, it was not intended to be a shelter system. It was intended to be something that served people for a few days to a couple of months.
So you're referencing the original GA housing program and not the pandemic era?
Correct.
And I can speak to that because I remember when the program was moved from the overseer of the poor to the state, and created the GA program in the late 60s.
Yes.
So,
and I think
experienced this. And yes, it was emergency, one time only, empty pockets. And you get into the Sophie's choice is a motel room better than someone on the street? And that is the dilemma. And unless we have some alternatives and build the capacity for those alternatives, then that puts us right where we are right now. So I think that's going to be the question, how we address that reality, and the fact that if there are not even enough motel rooms, and we don't think we want to have people on the street, what will be that emergency response as winter approaches.
Right. And as we look at our shelters, we know that shelters are an opportunity to combine services and a unit.
We have to create them.
Correct.
So-
Yep. And we've been working, and Commissioner Winters will go through that work. The work that we've been doing hand in hand with communities across the state to expand the system. Right now, we've got about 450 shelter beds. That's vastly under what we currently need. We're expanding in this year with the budget to 180 additional shelter beds, but we still will fall short without.
So what is the need? What is the need? Can you just tell us?
Right now, we have a little over 1,200 households who are currently in the hotel program. We anticipate as we get to adverse weather, we will push that up to about 1,500. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Commissioner Rogers.
Those numbers are right. So we have a significant shortfall in emergency shelters, and I can look a few pages ahead, but I can get into that part.
I think it's appropriate to jump right to you, and then we'll come back later to the.
We're going to have to, because it's 5 minutes of 12.
Yes.
We also have 211, and then for some of us, we have another, and we have, yes, we have the 8.
It's okay. 5 of 11.
It's only 11.
5 of 11.
And 6 o'clock.
Keep us time, Madam Chair.
Would you, I need to have a clock that's at the right, and looking at.
I think there's one right there.
Person to fix the clock for us.
Here we go. Here we go. This is what I miss too. I have it right in front of me all
Oh,
the time.
great, thank
Yeah.
you. Oh,
You got to fix it.
I got to fix it though.
yeah, could you turn it?
Set back to you.
Turn back time.
The clock on my car is 1 hour and 27 minutes off. And so I have to go through a mental calculation what time it really is.
Right.
Oh, all
That's what I
right.
keep right there so I
All
can
right,
keep track
thank
of
you.
time.
All
too.
right, so, and I'm not going to hyperventilate quite as much. I was like, oh my God.
It's like, oh my God, we've got
But I
grants.
think it's a good idea. Why don't we go directly to you?
To Commissioner Winters.
Happy to do that. Thank you. I'll jump into, the question that keeps coming up. What do we do with the hotel motel program? In the meantime, how do we address this gap between now and when we have sufficient units? And it's already been pointed out. And as you all know, DCF has always been a safety net and not a housing provider. And we're on the front lines every day trying to help as many people as we possibly can under the constraints that we have. And, we can't keep doing what we're doing and expect things to get better. We are making so many efforts on the front lines every single day, but without more units to help people move on, they can't move on. They are stuck in a number of instances. We've been working hard to address and prevent unsheltered homelessness and implement all types of plans since the start of the pandemic era hotel program. We've been diligent in supporting and working with our community partners, as was said, on many fronts, including record spending, in part due to the money allocated from this body, $24.6 million in federal and state funds in state fiscal year 2024 under the Housing Opportunity Grant Program. It went to 37 nonprofit organizations across Vermont, and we administer those grants through our Office of Economic Opportunity. And we've provided funding and expertise and support to do things like operate overnight emergency shelters, provide essential services to shelter guests, provide transitional housing, rapid rehousing for families, implementing a coordinated entry system so we can streamline client access, flexible financial assistance, and administering the homeless management information system. We've also worked to support emergency shelter expansions, supports and services for households experiencing homelessness. We've increased financial assistance, increased staff positions within those community partners, and provided so many different motel-based services. I'm in denial about having these reading glasses. I'm going I may have aged a disproportionate number of years in the last 8 months.
Light, yes.
Light would help.
It does help. So at DCF, we continue to work hard on trying to find new shelter locations to support, find providers to support those shelters, to provide emergency housing expertise, connect individuals with services, prevent eviction. So the list goes on and on of the things that we've been trying, but despite our best efforts to assist those who are experiencing homelessness, the challenge continues to persist because individuals can't move forward without a place to call home. We haven't witnessed a decline in the number of people requiring the safety net. And so the hard truth that we all have to face is that what we're doing now and what we're doing this winter will cost us at least $50 million a year. And that's without delivering all the necessary services that help people succeed and get out of homelessness. So those folks are left struggling and too often stuck in an unending cycle. And we, Secretary Samuelson and I have visited a number of people in the hotels and motels, and often they have jobs, they have vouchers, they have plans to move out, but they can't find a unit to move into. As was stated, we have about 450 shelter beds across the state. That's separate from the hotel motel program where we have a capacity of about 1,500 rooms. There's a general consensus that a shelter model that combines congregate and non-congregate shelters run by nonprofits rather than a for-profit hotel system is really preferable and where we would all like to go. But the reality is that right now, it's not a feasible option in the near term. We've been and we continue to work with communities across the state to bolster those existing shelters and to identify and expand options. But as you've heard, we've been able to generate about 180 beds over the last year and a half. But so some of the obstacles to doing that is that expanding the shelter model requires staffing to run them, suitable locations, community support, and funding. And it's really hard to site these shelters. It's really hard to get community support. Our existing providers are tapped out and burned out, so finding a workforce to run these shelters is often a very difficult task. But we have assisted, there are success stories. We have assisted communities in expanding their shelter. Some have shifted seasonal shelters to year-round. We have a young adult project down in Brattleboro. We have new and expanded day shelter capacity, and we have other projects that are in the pipeline in Rutland, Hartford, and Brattleboro. But expanding those beds, even though it's necessary, faces the same challenge as the broader housing issue, a lack of units and no space for a swift transition. So we could spend a lot of money building and expanding if we can get the communities to support it and the providers to run it. But when we find now that when we put people into those emergency shelters, they stay there for a very long time. I think the average stay is about 265 days now. So it's not that quick in and out emergency safety net that it was once intended to be. We explored a more comprehensive plan that includes things like money for rapid rehousing, additional shelter and transitional housing beds, wraparound services, economic supports through subsidies and vouchers to get people out of homelessness and then keep them out of homelessness. But under the best case scenario with the current caseload, we are talking about a $70 million plan that we have put together that also comes with a substantial permanent increase to the base of the budget. Because as you build more shelters, there's more costs going forward to run them and keep them up and running. So that the feasibility of that plan is really questionable. And we have to think about the wisdom of such a large expansion of shelters when we don't have an adequate supply of housing units to make sure that those shelter stays are brief, as was always intended. So until we have more units, the plan is not going to solve the underlying issues, either for the June 30 cohort or the broader population that's experiencing homelessness right now. In fact, it really has the potential to make Vermont less affordable and exacerbate the problem that we're trying to address. So we really look forward to the day when we have a sufficient number of units to make rapid rehousing, prevention, and intervention a viable option and a good investment with those vouchers and those services to help people move quickly in and out of homelessness. That'd be a far more cost-effective approach than what we're doing right now, which is spending $4,000 a month on a hotel room under a for-profit model. And we really look forward to the day when we get to needing a much smaller safety net, as was the case not so long ago. So whether we spend 50 million or 70 million, Until we have that supply of units that can reduce the safety net caseload, the problem is going to persist with increasing financial and human costs each year. If there was an easy answer here, we would have taken it by now. So in the near term, the need for shelter beds is going to be increasingly serious with the end of the June 30th cohort stay, which is on April 1st. We can't continue to rely on hotels to house those in need. So we are going to propose to establish emergency shelters for those still in hotels at the end of the current program this spring. It's a costly and it's a temporary measure, but it does represent a critical step toward a more sustainable solution. We'll continue to do everything we can to get those folks who are in the cohort permanent housing before we get to April 1st. But the numbers are not going down as quickly as they were in the first few months. I think it's maybe only shifted by about 20 people coming out of the cohort since we last spoke to you here. And so there's still around 800 people in the cohort. So to help reduce the impact of this transition from hotels to emergency shelters, we're also developing a cost-neutral rapid rehousing program that would give those folks some economic supports leading up to April 1st. And that program is intended to reduce the financial barriers to finding and leasing units. So I'll wrap it up saying that we're really hopeful that using fewer hotel rooms is going to incentivize lower room rates because we have no negotiating power right now. And it might spur the sale of hotels that we could turn into transitional housing, affordable permanent units, shelters, or recovery housing, some other purposes that we really need to create more units. Homelessness is a crisis and we need more housing units to solve it. Maybe you'll sense a theme here among the presenters. The bottom line is we have to make changes for the long-term housing market, and the reality of the short term is really, really hard. It's incredibly expensive, and we remain open to working with you on how we move forward there. I want to thank you all for your commitment and your dedication to addressing this really difficult issue that we're all going to have to face together. I don't know where we go after that.
I want to say, thank you very much for that. And I understand that we have very specific reporting requirements and rules around the specific cohort, but I at least, and I imagine other people who can speak for themselves, it's the general, it's folks who are experiencing a lack of housing right now that is the focus. And any solution should include everyone experiencing homelessness, not just this very specific narrow cohort we're talking about.
We agree.
And I'm looking forward to a plan that both takes into account the fact that permanent housing is the solution and that we can't leave people on the street while we are building.
So we have short-term, long-term that have to go in parallel.
Yeah.
And hopefully some of the temporary housing is of the nature that
Phase it out.
over time.
It's kind of like those buildings at the University of Vermont after the war. Remember, they were temporary for I don't know how many decades, or the Middlesex facility. But we've got
1 decade there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we have some questions, Rep. Wood, and then Rep. Harrison.
So, you referenced my glasses just broke. You referenced reducing reliance on the hotels and motels as of April 1st and establishment of emergency shelter system, broadening of that system. I guess we're all have open ears and wondering, what does that exactly mean?
So it's in preliminary phases. We're talking to communities. We want to have probably 4 to 5 of those up and running around the state by April 1st. More details to come on that. We do know, we have researched the staffing piece of it, the cost involved. And then, as I stated in my remarks, it's not a long-term solution. It's not an inexpensive solution, but we really believe that we need to break this hotel motel model in order to move forward in other areas.
I don't disagree. On that. And so are you, do you have not specific regional locations, but are you identifying properties, I guess, that don't necessarily rely on a hotel or motel owner deciding to sell or lease
Yes.
to the state?
Yes, we are, and I think it would be premature to start talking about that right now. As I also stated in my remarks, it's really hard to cite some of these locations, and it takes a community to rally around and support. It's going to take an effort from everybody in order to help address unsheltered homelessness. It's a crisis. We're going to see the human impact and the human toll, especially around April 1st, when that cohort time is ending, and when people are coming out of the adverse weather hotel motel program. We'll have 1,500 hotel rooms full.
Anticipated would have to be in place, but you needed more time.
Right.
And simply shutting down the program, to be honest.
And just one more thing. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but so I'm interpreting that what you say is that you have a plan to continue sheltering people who are homeless.
I think in particular, the large number coming out of the cohort and from adverse weather conditions in the spring, we're focused on that at the moment, but there will be an ongoing crisis of unsheltered homelessness we still need to think about. So the short term and the long term.
So that was yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that.
Can I point out one of the elements there, Chair, if I may? One of the reasons that Commissioner Winters is being very conservative about talking about where communities are is that we need to build the community support. And even as we sit today, we've got several of our shelter programs that have already received significant legal and community pushbacks. We're actually anticipating that. Last time we were here, we were talking about the VFW. We were really excited about that. We anticipate that might even be in jeopardy at this point. So we need your help to help garner that community support and to overcome some of the regulatory and other barriers with establishing and setting up these shelters.
On the positive side, St. Johnsbury used the Home Act and
they did. Very
I would just want to back that up because Hyde Park went through this with a community that was very supportive. And we spent almost a year in Superior Court getting to the point for approval. So we have to think about, if you're talking about April 1st, we've got to think about how can we streamline this to help people along, because it took almost a year in Hyde Park.
So if we're here to talk about concrete things today, we've already identified some of them. I want to make sure that this gets pointed out as one of those other components.
Yeah, we understand. I think all of us have communities that we've experienced.
And the Home Act took the zoning piece out for shelters.
I'm going to go to Rep. Harrison, then Senator Westman, and then Rep. Kornheiser. So in that order, it's yours, Jim.
So I'll try to be quick. First of all, I think we all appreciate the sense of urgency and identify. We know it's a problem. We can all agree on the shortage of housing. And sometimes unknowingly, we make it worse by some of the policies we set up in the past. The lack of economic incentive to build more housing, for example, because we can't do it all, as you've identified, with public money. We just don't have enough. We can't print our own money to do this. But, Secretary Samuelson, you and I had the maybe fortune or unfortunate of sitting in a public forum last week in Rutland on public safety. And there was a number of people in the audience that blamed the uptick in crime in the Rutland area on the hotel program. And some of that may be true and some of it may not be, but that's the perception out there. The other issue is we lost a major hotel in the Rutland area. It used to be called the Holiday Inn with 150 plus rooms. They were full all winter with people visiting a major ski area in our area. That's gone. So what does that do? People are entrepreneurs and they'll go where the money is. So now people converting condos and homes to Airbnbs to take it. The demand's still there for units.
It's all dominoing around.
It is. And I don't have a short-term answer, but when you lose a hotel and employers up on the mountain, I was at Killington yesterday, employers have had to, because of the workforce shortage, have had to buy some of these small inns up there, convert it to workforce housing. And as a consequence, again, visitors have no place to go, so they end up renting homes. And some of them are doing quite well at that because of demand. Part of their whole TIF project and development of the new village up there is workforce housing. The town manager yesterday said they expect to build 250 to 300 housing units, and it may take up to 10 years. 10 years is a lifetime away, and I don't have an answer. It's just adds.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. Sorry, I just had it's complicated, and I appreciate you taking the.
Yeah, and it just shows how, what the collateral impacts are
It is.
all around and, you know, the economic impact.
What is it? Oil, you know, drill, baby, drill. Well, it's build, baby, build. Just build.
Should we make those bumper stickers?
You're giving somebody a rash, I'm sure, out there.
But that's part of it. We're going to have to get.
Senator Westman, then Rep. Kornheiser, and then we're going to to keep moving along. Oh, you.
I made my point when,
About what you had to.
I appreciate that you are doing the kind of work that we asked for in Act 81 around acknowledging and making some plans for this problem. And I hear you saying that we're going to need to all get on the same page and collaborate in communities and all of those things. We need details in order to do that. And so the foreshadowing is helpful, but until we can dig into the details, even of.
We could go now.
Do we have details today? Because I heard.
Recommendations.
Okay, great.
So we can identify some items, but I'd say more in-depth proposals, because there's gonna be a number of them. Can't all be addressed today, but I can.
No, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think we can talk about the high level overviews, obviously, because
And I
we're
was
making a firmer budget.
And make sure that we get a hard copy of them.
Right.
Yes.
So as we're getting a firmer budget picture, we have to finalize those policy proposals for funding mechanisms. But the administration's position is that we are going to have to take rapid action to create much needed units in 3 areas: land use, tax policy, and investment incentive proposals. We are recommending a response that treats our housing crisis like the emergency that we know it is. And with policy reforms that will expedite permanent lasting solutions for our homeless population, for those that are at risk of homelessness, low and moderate income families, and entry-level workers and young families. And basically, if I were to summarize this, we want to invert the disincentives over a really quick period of time that will look maybe different between counties. We want to revitalize counties, neighborhoods. We can put goals and targets on them. When we meet them, we can have governors, small g, we can pull back when we need to, right? But we need to do this fast. We need to be quick and we need to go at it. Alex can talk about some of our ideas. They're going to be at a high level today, but to your point, we will absolutely come with more detail. And maybe as we give you our high level, hopefully it'll give you all some thoughts. Maybe we're missing something as well. I think it is complex.
Yeah, we've had thoughts. We've had lots of thoughts.
A whole lot of things that we are, like, as we've said, we're gonna have to get outside our comfort zone, all of us, to make this move. So Alex, take it away.
And if I mention something and it catches your ear and you want to hear a little more detail, I can expand here today or follow up afterwards. So I think Rep. Kornheiser and a couple others already indicated we need to have a variety of options on the table, and I was glad to hear that because that's exactly our approach, and that's sort of what I'm going to rattle off right now. But I just want to couch this in sort of clarity that at this point, I'm not reading to you recommendations or proposals. I'm telling you what we are, what we're evaluating and what we think we're going to bring to the table.
So a menu of options are being evaluated.
That's right. That's right. So firstly, starting with what we did last year in the HOME Act, because there was a lot of consensus around the actions taken there, expanding that, particularly the pro-housing policies that help municipalities through their bylaws and their zoning to establish whether it's the by right provisions or avoid some of the traps that we can see in these bylaws and zoning that end up accidentally preventing housing. So we need to revisit the exclusionary zoning practices and how the state can actually take more steps to mandate what's in zoning and bylaws. During this last session, there was a lot of concurrence. I'm not going to say full concurrence, but a lot of concurrence that Act 250 exemptions are necessary. And I just want to say that the targeted place-based approach would also be our approach. Though what you're going to hear from us is broadening the areas for exemptions. I just want to, as I dive into that a bit more, I just want to say we aren't in danger of overbuilding housing. And I think that's one of the goals of Act 250 is to sort of make sure that there's a bit of a governor on housing production. I think we can all agree we are not in danger of overbuilding housing. I've heard that from everybody. Yes, so, and where, exactly. So place-based exemptions, I think, are the key that we'd all be comfortable with. So we need to reduce the barriers that are embedded in it, and specifically allowing for construction of being built more densely. So when we look at, say, the 10 by 5 by 5 rule, that actually has the effect, well, the opposite effect of I think what we want. It creates sprawl. It causes 9-unit housing, 9-unit housing, 9-unit housing. So we need to look at that rule in a few different ways. So there's the cap, the 10, and then the mileage and the time components. The cap, I think, there's no disagreement. That is intended to cap the number of units in the development, at least to which it triggers an Act 250 review. We all got comfortable with raising that cap within designated areas. It's time to look at removing the cap in designated areas. That's a very, very small amount of land mass, and removing that cap would enable more projects to go forward with more units. Outside of those areas, particularly areas served by municipal water and sewer where it's accessible, and municipalities that have zoning, in those areas, we need to raise the cap higher than 10. We need to consider lowering that time restriction, that 5-year time restriction, or eliminating it, because I think we agree what we need right now is production quickly. And lowering the mileage, what we feel is a rather arbitrary mileage component of that. Why would we want to actually push and spread? That feels counterproductive, especially when we're trying to build densely around our designated areas. So that's the Act 250 component. But that's not the only aspect here that we want to approach. So we need to also get serious about the timelines. The timelines for review need to be short and predictable. That's both at the state level and at the municipal level. I think we need to consider the state establishing mandated timelines for development review boards to review and approve or deny, but the timeline needs to be shorter and predictable. To some extent, perhaps that might include timelines at the state level with public comment periods, making sure those are right sized to be appropriate. And then we also need to look internally as state government, things like corrective action plans, and perhaps those are a bit stronger and go too far and are a bit too burdensome for developers when there would be a perfectly safe alternative that would allow for housing development to move forward more quickly. So that's the land use portion. Down to the tax policy portion. If we're going to lower the cost of housing, we need to remove the barriers to investing in the housing. That's both investment in new units and the rehabilitation of existing units. And I heard Representative Harrison talking about why are these blighted buildings sitting here. There are a lot of policies in place that allow for that to happen and don't incentivize that building owner, especially if they're an absentee owner, that don't incentivize them to invest it. So things that we need to look at, we need to consider the study of a land value tax, which land value tax could actually incentivize the investment in the property and not give you a reason to just let it sit vacant and see blight. Other items that we need to look at, just evaluate, the property transfer tax, the capital gains tax, the rental rebate, and I think it's time to eliminate the current annual cap on the downtown tax credits.
Can I just jump in for a moment?
those are all really important things to take a look at. I heard earlier a reference to we can't just do this with public money. I just want to be clear that an economic incentive or a tax incentive is spending public money. If you're doing it on the front end or the back end, it's still public money.
Tax expenditure.
It is a tax expenditure. And so, which is a fine thing to do in a lot of policy conditions. I just want to be clear that it's still public money because I think sometimes it gets a little distorted that way.
And I want to reiterate that we see state investment as a part of this. We aren't sitting here saying we need to stop investing as a state. I'll also point to the returns that the state gets from things like the downtown tax credit. That foregone revenue actually more than pays for itself. So capping it is arbitrary and does not end up working out for us in the long run. But speaking to the financing and what we need to do with our housing investments and aligning our current housing investments, we need to make sure that we're looking at programs and investments that have proven to work. That could be programs in the Department of Housing and Community Development, like my Housing Improvement Program and MER. It could be further investment in VHCB and VHFA programs. But all of that needs to be with this county by county framework in mind, because we know that what we do at the land use level, what we do at the zoning level, that's only an aspect of this. And then where we close the gaps is with these programs. So it needs to be targeted. The development of programs like VHIP and MER, I want to point to as being very targeted, identifying something. In that case, it was the atrophy, the housing atrophy. And then another financing piece that I want to point to is, and I can't remember who brought it up earlier, but the infrastructure that is so often a burden to a new housing development.
You just read my notes. That was
to
is developers help with the infrastructure cost up front for putting in a road,
Exactly.
sewer, things like this. This would be very helpful to them.
And that's a massive burden. We know of projects that could get online, but that piece, that upfront cost, decades ago, municipalities used to have the capacity to bear that burden and front that cost for the developer, because they knew they'd get the benefit of the grand list growing in the long run. Well, our municipalities don't have that capacity now financially. They can't face that expenditure. They can't bond for it. So it's time for the state to look at possibilities such as revolving loan funds. How can we finance that in a way that lowers the cost, at least gets developers over that hump so that unit generation can happen? I don't need to tell anyone here, because I think we've all agreed that there needs to be a substantial increase in unit generation, and I just want to state that nobody at this table, none of us, have any ulterior motive for wanting to see unit generation. The recommendations that we're going to come forward with are purely to generate units. There is no other motive other than that. And I'd just like to reiterate before I pass it back.
We'll always be careful of unintended consequences, though.
Certainly.
Sometimes when you get very anxious to do something, sometimes we let loose something we're not happy with later.
I think
we have to recalibrate.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's right. So I'll pass it back to Secretary Curley.
Yeah, so we'll wrap this up now. I really appreciate everybody's attention, listening through us. As you can tell, our team's done a lot of work together. We spent time trying to understand each other and each other's needs for trying to, serve the populations that we each serve. And we've worked across not only each other's agencies, but other agencies in state government. And we really feel like we have a better handle on what is needed than we've ever had before. And just, to remind you all, that our high level conclusions is we're not going to make a dent in the homelessness issue if we don't address unit creation. We must substantially and quickly jumpstart the rehabilitation and the construction of housing units. And funding alone is not going to create the housing that we need to achieve our shared community revitalization goals. We must couple it with policy shifts that incentivize and motivate builders to move quickly and create more opportunities for renters and homeowners in our most vulnerable populations. And I think we're all on board here. I think we all agree we can't keep kicking this can down the road. We have to pick up the can and we have to gather around it and make really big change and ensure that, the future is bright. Because the Vermont that we know and love is truly at risk for becoming a really different place than what we know and love. And so I'm inspired. I hope you're all inspired. I think we can do this. It's going to be a heavy lift, but if we come together, I think we really feel like we can achieve this. So
Thank you. Yes, Susan, comments.
The homeless crisis is a crisis, and people will rally around that. But what's got our attention now is this is not just homeless people. We can't get teachers, we can't get mental health workers, we can't get workers in our businesses because they can't afford housing.
Well, they can't find it.
They can't find it, they can't afford it. If they find it, scarcity drives the market. And
So one last comment, Senator Westman, we've got to move on.
Yeah, two things. One, you have to take into account with that stormwater runoff and going down to that. And I'll just say, I just went out trying to find an engineer to go through Act 250. Didn't see the Act 250 time period and the times to get your permit. It's getting the engineer to do the work. I went to 3 engineers and they all said, if you try to go through Act 250, it will take so much of our time that we don't have enough engineers. So it isn't the Act 250 process per se, it's getting to that. And that's the same as we don't have enough teachers or anything else.
right.
Well, I think we have a lot more work and discussion ahead and more detail. So thank you very much for coming in. And I'm going to turn it over to August Seelig is here today, and he's going to bring us up to date on the HCB's initiative, housing front. Then we'll end with the 211. And I realize we have a lot more information here on 211, but we have, our goal is just to focus on the housing piece.
Jane?
Yes, Senator Clarkson. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
I can't, I'm not being allowed to be seen. For the first time, I'm being edited.
We have a muted you too.
Hi. I know they're not allowing me to be viewed. So, they can, whoever's running this, Aaron can figure it out. I can't figure it out. So, hi, do you not, I just want to check because I have a 12 o'clock that I need to, are you not wanting to do basic needs budget today? Because we're very short. We were on deck for 11:15 and I realize we're running behind here.
And you have to leave at noon, right?
That would be ideal.
I want to, we're going to just have to finish these updates and we've had documents. So if you can wait until, can you just do some more work and we'll bring you on even if it means interrupting somebody at 11:45.
Yeah. And of course, basic needs budget does dovetail into housing in a nice way.
Well, it certainly does. Everything dovetails into something, usually money. So why don't we, we'll just keep going as quickly as we can and hopefully 12:45 we can get to basic need. We have a lot of grants to approve and so it's been a very important conversation and obviously has taken some time. So welcome Gus and Polly. And if you want to realize, recognizing the time crunch.
They'll be very brief.
Okay, appreciate that.
For the record, Gus Seelig, Director for the Housing and Conservation Board.
And Polly Major, I'm the Policy Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation.
I'll say a few things at the top and then hand it to Polly. A few weeks ago, I was in Boston for a national conference under Dr. Megan Sandel, who I think visited the State House about 4 years ago. She's with the Children's Health Watch and talks about housing as a vaccine. I'm delighted to hear the testimony that came just before us, that we need much more housing and we need housing that will be permanent and available to folks. Just at the beginning of this presentation is a very nice picture of a great celebration we had in Bristol 2 weeks ago, a couple days ago. Last week, I think Senator Cummings was with us in East Calais, where we got a new store and three apartments on the market. So there's good things happening all over. I was quite depressed when the Waterbury DRB voted not to advance 26 units, and I'm delighted to say that they changed their minds. And though it isn't being credited to Act 47, my guess is that when they looked at Act 47 and talked with an attorney, somebody probably said, you can't turn this project down over height, which was the basis upon which several members continue to vote against the project. So, and you've all heard the story about the new shelter in St. Johnsbury. So all of those things are really important. We're continuing to work on the mobile home initiative. And we have our first private park owner who's expressed an interest in private homes. So we'll keep you posted on all of that. I am delighted to hear that we, as a state, need to focus on new units. One thing that didn't get attached to the Homes Act last year, but I think I spoke to when I had the opportunity to speak at the orientation day, is that New Hampshire's adopted a Housing Board of Appeals. I saw the author of that legislation when I was in Boston. He said it's working really well. They're making decisions generally within 120 days, and the 4 cases that got appealed to their Supreme Court, the board was upheld all 4 times. So that didn't get attached to the Homes Act last year because it would have meant stopping the judiciary and the bill wouldn't have made crossover. But I think it's something you ought to consider this year. I'm glad to hear the commissioner saying that we need to look at the corrective action plan process, which takes forever at DEC. So it's not just permitting, it's how do we also fix our internal processes to advance those issues. Pleased to report that we continue to see that as units turn over, 40% of them are going to people who are unhoused. That's coming at some great stress on the housing delivery system. We're in discussion with AHS about what we've made for funding for service coordinators across the network, and I'm going to stop there.
I'm going to take you through some of the data that we've been submitting with our monthly reports, and I'll move through quite quickly, I think, because of the time limitations, but feel free to stop me for any clarifications. So we've been talking about the really historic investment in affordable housing that the state has made, and these are the production numbers that VHCB is sharing or is seeing 2020 through 2023. And so you see that that investment is really yielding thus far about 1,600 new homes. And to drill down a little bit more into more granular detail, because the report asks us to report month by month. In September, we saw 74 of those homes come online. This month, there's 20, next month, 62. So we're really seeing month by month additional units being added to the state's supply. There's a ribbon cutting in Brattleboro this afternoon for a project down there that'll add 15 units. 15 units. And those are funded units. So we know when they're funded, they don't appear, they need to be built. And we wanted to give you some sense of when they would come online. So by the end of this year, about 700 units will be online from the kind of 2020 on investment. By the end of next year, there's an additional 400. And by the end of 2025, there'll be an additional 500. So that completes 1,600 units. What this chart where this chart is a little bit misleading is that at the end of 24 or the end of 25, we hope the total funded units isn't still 1,600 units. We have a strong pipeline of projects that communities are bringing forward to us, saying we would like to bring more units online. Gus will touch on that at the end of the presentation. We've been reporting on the number of units that are being leased to households exiting homelessness. There's a conversation around units that are set aside for households and then what gets leased for households. And what we're seeing here is that all units are available when they become open, they're available to anyone who meets the income qualification. So they are available to households exiting homelessness, whether or not they are dedicated and set aside. The dedicated units have an advantage because they come with that subsidy and with that service tie-in. So it makes them a really good fit and strong fit. But our partners are going above and beyond that dedication, mandated dedication to house more households exiting homelessness, and have really increased their efforts in the past several years to do that. So in the past 3 years, they've housed 1,000 households coming out of homelessness just within the existing affordable housing portfolio that Vermont has. But as Gus mentioned, in doing that, the housing providers have really experienced a need for greater services, greater service coordination. We're in discussion with AHS on how we can help really bolster those efforts. We're also asked to report on investments in the shelter system around the state. The HCD has invested in Vermont shelters across our history, but since 2020, we've really increased those efforts with ARPA and CRF dollars, and really touched every shelter bed in the state, and then some, because in these numbers you're seeing the shelter beds that are being produced and in the pipeline. And this is our existing pipeline of shelter projects, knowing that we always want to be responsive to opportunities as they arise into communities who bring forward new projects. And I think you see both the successes and challenges in this graph. You see Moose River Shelter in St. Johnsbury. That's going to be the first shelter in the Northeast Kingdom that came together very quickly through a great effort between Northeast Kingdom Community Action and Rural Edge. And that will be online hopefully next month. And then on the other side, still a success. We see Forest Hill and Hyde Park that intended to be online in time for this cold winter season, but because of an appeal that ultimately got resolved, but it took some time to negotiate, that because of that appeal, the timeline for opening has been pushed out until April. So even when appeals are resolved, it does have this impact of slowing down during the addition of much needed units. And finally, we work to set up the manufactured home replacement and infill program to put rental homes in available lots around the state that are available to households exiting homelessness. This is an activity that the HCD has already been engaged in. We did about 20 of these infill units with ARPA and CRF dollars. The most successful was with the partnership between Addison Housing Works, they just rebranded, and the John Graham Shelter, but there are examples around the state of that. And starting in July, when this program was authorized, we started to talk to our core partners about this and work with our board to set up the program. So we have 3 proposals that in varying stages of readiness that we're working with applicants on for that, and continue to get the word out there about this program. So I included the link to the program in case you know of any parks in your area that might want to take advantage of this opportunity and help to house people exiting homelessness.
And we do have a mobile home task force that is chaired by. So it's probably, there's some intersection with what you're doing and that group as well.
We do. I sit on it and was talking about this program with them on Friday.
Representative Taylor took me on a tour. She's doing an incredible job communicating about the work of the task force. I feel like it's a model for all of us could actually.
Okay, so I'll just conclude by saying we continue to have a pipeline. We'll be funding projects in December, January, May, June as they come to us and they're ready. I don't know that we have enough funding to hit all of the 450 units that are in the pipeline right now. I don't know if all of them will, when they get underwritten, prove to be ready. But we think that we'll end the year without funds to transfer into next year. We expect, again, a healthy pipeline.
Can I just say, when you say the end of the year, the fiscal year?
The end of fiscal year. Yes, fiscal year. I think Chair Lanfear, you made an important point as the previous discussion witnesses were here, which is that the market doesn't produce affordable housing ever. There's a new development going up in Burlington right now. You can rent an efficiency when it gets built for $3,000 a month. That speaks to how expensive building has gotten. That doesn't just say the developer's greedy. It speaks to.
It's the cost. Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Speaks to the cost. So I guess I would just say, however you look at it, we will not achieve the goals without a public investment that is much larger than what you've always heard advocates talk about, the VHCD statutory share. The costs have about doubled to build housing since 2018 across the state for a variety of reasons. So it will take, in my opinion, public investment if we're going to serve people who can't afford what the market produces, which is increasingly leaving them behind. We're happy to continue to work on the shelter issues because although I'd rather not expand the shelter system in Vermont, we've already added close to 200 beds. I think that in the short term, that's going to continue to be necessary.
Rep. Kaiser, and then.
I'm curious about, so there's the resources that you move directly to community partners to build housing. And that's sort of the bulk of your work. I'm curious, are there other resources that you think would be helpful in making sure that communities are either any of the housing trust partners or anyone else to help them be sort of ready to be putting in proposals with you all? To sort of move the process along faster, I guess.
Two things we've done or are about to do. One is that we have a statewide nonprofit, Evernorth. We're giving them a grant specifically to help organizations like shelters who don't have development experience, don't have construction management experience. At the beginning of the pandemic, they helped on a number of projects. One was in Rutland across from the high school in that old John Deere dealership. So we're going to do that again. We're making, as a result of the flooding, we're making some funding available in conjunction with a commerce agency to help a bunch of communities look at the issue of where should they be building and where should they be removing housing and working toward buyouts. So yes, there's a number of, and we've always had what we call a feasibility fund and project-related capacity grants. So when there's a really complex project to be undertaken, we'll make a grant to help absorb some of those pre-development costs. One of the reasons housing takes a lot of time is that developers don't want to spend money until they think they really have a deal that's going to work, whether it's permitting, architects, engineers, acquiring the land. So we do have funds that help to jumpstart stuff. That said, and this goes to what I've said to you in the last 2 years when you've been very supportive in budget adjustment, the value of providing more money in budget adjustment is that it sends a signal to people that they should continue to spend absorb those pre-development costs because there's a high chance that there'll be funding available to build their projects when they get through their design and permitting issues and bring us the applications.
Any other questions? I promised Allison, I realized I'm very sorry we had for Elizabeth waiting for so long at the end. But I promised Allison that, so I'm going to conclude this. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Go to Senator Parkson, who's going to give us briefly the changes in the basic needs, and then we'll go back to the 211 experience, and then we're going to go into grant approval. So Senator Parkson, we have your memo that basically is asking for approval. Oh, and Patrick's here. Yeah, okay. This document, number C.
You've got our secret weapon. You've got our secret weapon there. You've got Patrick. So okay. I had the pleasure of chairing the basic needs budget task force this summer, and our challenge was to address the methodological way that we calculate the means by which we calculate this. And JFO, as you know, had wanted to do this. We haven't done it for 15 years, and we were behind the times. We had a very robust task force, a great group of people. Richie is one of them who's there with you. So we've embedded one of our members with you, and we have Patrick there to follow up on everything I just introduced this with. We had a very productive time. We have before you, we have 6 recommendations on how to change the methodology in the calculation. And we will have 2 statutory changes we're going to have to do through statute with a bill. So we'll be working with Damien on that and getting that into our respective committees. I just, before Patrick's going to go through the 6 changes that we're going to ask you to approve. But we, once we make these changes, we feel we have a very robust tool to calculate on a biannual basis the cost of what it costs to live in Vermont. This is an incredibly useful tool. And one of the challenges that we face is how people will use it going forward. So we would love your collective wisdom, not right now, but in the future, on how we can make this used more fully, both in the public and private sector. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, who's going to walk you through the 6 changes we need your committee to approve so that JFO can go forward for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm feeling a little nervous here because we're seeing really this, and to understand the implications of some of these recommendations within 3 minutes. I'm not sure it's giving us a full understanding of what we're agreeing or approving today. So, but perhaps we've got Senator Westman here and he feels very comfortable with the recommended changes. We can go through them quickly. I just am worried that there are implications here that we don't fully understand. We can say, well, yes, let's approve these 7. I'm just wondering if if we could look at some alternative other than rushing through something without a full understanding today's meeting.
When are you next meeting, Jane? When are you next meeting? Because if we present them today, and if you could vote on them at your next meeting, I think that would be ample time. Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that would give JFO time. I mean, they haven't begun the work of this next year's report, which, as you recall, is done at the beginning of each biennium, so that we have that basic needs budget and livable wage document as we go into the new biennium.
Maybe Catherine can help us.
So you do not have another meeting scheduled right now.
That.
So I'm just wondering if you, I'm thinking about the grants process. Do you want to take time and you could hear from Patrick, you could, I wonder if an email would approve?
Was it grants?
If, like, you approve grants through email, I don't.
I don't know what, the all-member day, it's probably stacked up already, but we could have a brief meeting afterwards and give us time. Because I am not comfortable, just in a very quick way, just saying, yeah, let's approve it and move on because of the time. So if you want to run through them very quickly, Patrick, but then we've got to go back to the 211, and then we still have got grants to approve. So I think we'll defer any approval today, and we'll work out another time for the committee to make its decision.
That would be great.
Now you can run to your noon meeting. So we'll go through this very quickly, and then.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to let Patrick take it over, and thanks so much, everybody. Have fun. See you soon.
So in light of that, Patrick, you've got some flexibility on your schedule. I'm going to go to 211, and then we'll come back to this. Because I'm really concerned about the fact that we've kept a witness waiting so long. So, do we still have the witness in the waiting room?
Yes.
Yes, Elizabeth Gilman. Yes, Elizabeth, yes, she's, okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. Again, apologies for, I'm hoping that you were able to do other work while you were being held in suspense here. We wanted to hear briefly the experience from 211's perspective around the housing and the emergency housing and the role that you play. Appreciate all the other data that you gave us, because we know 211 certainly provides a range of information, referral, and services. So we're going to focus on really what you're seeing on the after-hour emergency housing role that you play for DCF.
Yes, thank you so much for allowing me to testify today. I think, part of providing those two reports, one which is a year report during the contract year with AHS, and the other just in the last 4 months, I think it underscores of all the calls and the needs that we handle for Vermonters, that basic needs obviously always rises to the top, and housing and shelter far outstrips all other basic needs that people are reaching out to us for. I would like to emphasize what I think probably everybody knows. The population of people experiencing homelessness is not a stagnant population. Some of those contacts that we have with folks are people who are at risk for losing their housing or are currently housed in substandard housing. So, I think we talk about the housing crisis, and I think it's important to bear in mind that that's an ever-changing population that is increasing. We will see people who are currently housed who will lose their housing in the next year. We have started receiving requests for adverse weather conditions in October, which obviously has not started yet. I think it also speaks to the population of folks who are sleeping unsheltered and are recognizing the change and the shift in the weather and whether or not they're able to handle that shift in weather. I would like also pivot to the statistical report that I provided that shows the comparison of the last 4 months, July, August, September, and October, and the change in the amount of after-hours emergency housing calls we received between 2022 and 2023, and that increase. I think it speaks to what we all know and what we've all been talking about today, which is the housing crisis. I would like to indicate that that drop in after-hour calls from August to September is not because there was some improvement and reduction in amount of people experiencing homelessness. That is more an indicator of some things that economic services implemented to better handle the extremely high call volume that they received because of the housing crisis. So as they were able to change some of what was happening during the day, we were not receiving the runoff at 211 during the evening hours when we provide emergency housing. I think that this is mostly just sort of backing what we know, but I think it's helpful to see the numbers of what 211 is experiencing. We're one of so many nonprofit agencies across the state that are supporting and helping people experiencing homelessness. So this is certainly just a snapshot of what that landscape probably looks like for nonprofits across the state. I would like to echo what Commissioner Winter said, which is, all of those working front lines with people experiencing homelessness are experiencing that burnout. We are experiencing that high volume and that high need with no solutions. And it is taxing and it is difficult to maintain and support a strong, qualified, talented workforce when you are being burnt out by a system that isn't really having a solution for those with the highest needs and in the highest level of crisis. So I just wanted to provide that testimony and our experience with the emergency housing program and how it's been going, particularly in the last 4 months.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Yes, one answer. Thank you.
In my experience in human services, one of the biggest causes or links to burnout is folks feeling like they're engaging on a very micro level with systemic problems that they have no ability to make a difference in. And so I would be curious, not necessarily now, but to hear from you really talking to your direct service staff or making these calls about what they're seeing beyond these statistics and what you all need to actually make a difference in the populations that you're serving in a way that really feels like service with integrity for those folks. Because I think really that's a lot of where we can solve burnout, is for folks to feel like someone's listening to them about the work that they do and able to make a difference.
Well, the other dimension here is just sort of that transferred trauma. You're dealing with people in crisis. You have families with children and they're hungry and they're without and so that experiencing that repeatedly day after day extracts a toll on any direct line service worker. So people are calling you. Obviously, some of what you get is more informational and referral, and that may help balance it out. But I'm sure that your workers are experiencing a lot of households that are coming and calling in crisis. So if you will, just please let your staff know that the committee took the testimony, that you had an opportunity, and extend our thanks for the job that they're performing to serve people in need. Yes, Rep. Wood.
Thank you for being here today, Elizabeth. I think one of the reasons that I want to hear about 211 is for us to understand that it's not only the state workers that are experiencing the impact of the housing crisis and homelessness crisis that we have. So I appreciate this helps to round out the impact for other organizations that are our partners as well.
Other comments? Well, thank you very much. Again, our apologies, but maybe if you've had a chance to be listening to some of the testimony, that's also helpful for you as well. Thank you.
It absolutely was, and thank you very much.
So, Patrick, we'll come back to the basic needs. And we'll go to grants. And then we're going to segue into pensions. Some of us.
Sorry.
Stop laughing. Yes, okay.
So Patrick Titterton, Joint Fiscal Office. You should have 2 documents for reference. I'll be working up the memo, which I think you all already have in front of you. So there's 6 recommended methodology changes and then 2 changes related to assumptions that we use in the report. And so to start, and these are all requiring JFC approval. The logistics I would rely on Catherine to work through on that timing with. So just to start on the table in the first box, number 1, there are 2 recommended changes with regards to food. The first being that for single households, so we have 6 configurations, and some of them are single adult households. We make the assumption that those households are headed by a female, which affects the food data that we receive. We get data from the USDA, which has budgets for child, male, and female. So the change here would be to, rather than just taking the budget for the female from the USDA, to average the male and female together as the starting point. And that would affect the single adult households only. So because the USDA reports that, so the second change with regards to food, because the USDA reports their data on a national level, we then have to make an adjustment to get that to be more Vermont specific. We use 10-year average differential between national spending on food and Northeast spending on food using the Consumer Expenditure Survey. The reason for the 10-year average is that it smooths out year-to-year bumps. But recently what we've seen is that food spending in the Northeast is increasing at a higher rate than it is nationally. So by reducing the number of years used in the average, bringing that differential up to more current date, while at the same time allowing for that smoothing process by including multiple years. So those are the 2 changes recommended for food. For childcare, this is really a recommendation to continue existing methodology, but typically in this report, we do not include forms of public assistance. The whole sort of basis of it is how much do you need to earn to live in the state without requiring public assistance. The quirk here is that up to 575% of FPL, all of the configurations in the report qualify for the new childcare subsidies. So really, it's a recommendation to continue existing methodology, but to affirmatively say that those subsidies should be included in the report. So the third line item here has to do with clothing and household expenses. Currently, this spending category does not account for the cost of owning a computer, which, after discussion, the committee felt that having a computer in your home is a basic need and that should be accounted for in the budget. So the thought there is to go find the base price for a computer and then amortize that over a 3-year period. So basically, if we take an $800 computer, divide that by 36, that's sort of your monthly budget that we'd be allocating towards that expense. And so we would incorporate.
That include other things like stoves, refrigerators,
So that's a great question. So we actually back out household equipment like appliances and miscellaneous equipment. So this is all from the Consumer Expenditure Survey. Within that miscellaneous household equipment that we're backing out, that also includes things like lawnmowers or other things that you might reasonably expect a renter to have provided by their landlord. Within that expense category from the Consumer Expenditure Survey is computer ownership. So we're sort of backing it out, I guess, unintentionally in the current methodology. So this is a proposal to sort of reverse that oversight.
Not sure that answered your question.
Yeah, and the cost of the internet.
That's in another category. That's under telecommunications. Sorry. So what's in the memo here only covers areas that are being recommended for change. But there are other components for sure. Like you won't see housing listed in here, and certainly that's incorporated into the budget.
So I guess the question is, why does computer fit with clothing as opposed to telecommunications?
Well, we have the cost. So the telecommunications is more so the cost of sort of the connection. And then household expenses has more to do with the tangible items that you own.
Okay, so I guess we would have to know what's already there in that clothing and household expenses, and we're adding the computer to it. I'm sure the committee looked at that.
Yeah, this is within the framework of already what's in statute.
Which none of us have in our heads right now.
Obviously, okay. All right, the next one is just renaming. I guess that probably is.
Well, actually, before that, there's a telecommunications piece. So currently what we do is we take this usage survey data from the CDC to create a blended average between cell phone and landline use. Of course, cell phone use dominates that weighted average. It's at 68% as of the last survey, and it's been growing. And also, cell phone plans are more expensive than landline plans. So just given the growing prevalence of that type of use, and with the fact that knowing that by including landlines in here, we may be reducing the budget that you need to afford that cell phone plan, the committee recommends that you switch to considering cell phone only.
So you're taking out the landline?
No, we did take out.
You did? I mean, I dare say maybe the majority have done away with landlines now.
So this would be only including expenses for cell phones.
Right, so it does take out landline.
It does take out the landline, yeah.
It does take out the landline.
Rather than having that blended average.
Okay, thank you.
So number 5, personal expenses, they're recommending renaming that to miscellaneous expenses, which will make sense in a couple of bullet points. But the other thing related to miscellaneous expenses was, so in its inception in 1999, this was set at $2 per adult and $1 per child and was grown by inflation over time. It currently sits at about $3.50, and this is per day, $3.50 per adult and $1.75 per child per day. The committee looked at that and considered that, this is a type of expense that it's a category that doesn't fit into other traditional standard spending categories. It's sort of flexible spending. You think your coffee, newspaper, what have you, movie tickets. So the committee thought that an update to that number to $5 per day per adult and $2.50 per day per child was appropriate.
I understand the need to increase it. I'm curious where the number that's increased to came from.
That's a good question, and it came from essentially the same place that the original number came from. It just seems right.
I had a feeling.
Saw my grandson, he gets 250 of it.
It just feels right.
We had a long
You do a lot of good work on that.
We had a long discussion about whether or not, what we could tie this to, and they really couldn't find it.
Yeah.
So it's just saying, well, it's a reasonable.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
So moving down to number 6, this would be a new category, and this is sort of fixing maybe, I don't know if it was accidental, but a prior omission from the report. There's currently not a line item for spending on personal care products, so toothpaste, shampoo, that kind of stuff, which the committee felt is a basic need. Sorry?
Are diapers in here?
That would fall under household expenses.
Okay, thanks.
So they're proposing to add that as.
And children?
I didn't even think of adult, but I appreciate that.
They're proposing to add that as a new spending component, similar methodology using the consumer expenditure survey as with household expenses and clothing. So the last one to consider, these number 7, these are the two assumption change recommendations. The first one would be to add a single adult who lives in shared housing as a new configuration to the report. This is a configuration that had been in the report in the past, but in the most previous iterations has not been. And so this is sort of accounting for individuals who are not living with a spouse or partner, but they're living with roommates, which has implications on housing assumptions and how they file their taxes and things like that. And the second change here it relates to the inclusion of the childcare subsidies. So right now there are 2 family configurations that are 2 adults with 2 children. One of those assumes 2 wage earners and the other assumes just 1 wage earner, with the other partner staying at home and actually providing the childcare. So the spending on that is actually 0. With the inclusion of those subsidies, we're expecting to see those 2 family types converge quite a bit, because that's really the biggest difference in the expenses between those 2 households. And for that reason, and in recognition of we're adding another family configuration to this, the recommendation was to remove the 2 adults, 2 children, but with 1 wage earner from the report. So those are all the changes that would be for your approval. There are 2 recommendations that would require statutory changes. One being that the new single person in shared housing, so person living with roommates, become the new basis for the official livable wage. And also, given that right now statute says that the one official livable wage is an average between the urban and rural calculations. So technically, it doesn't directly relate to someone living in a rural area, and it also doesn't directly relate to someone living in an urban area, that you actually publish 2 official livable wages, one for the urban, one for the rural areas. But those are the ones that will be sort of presented in January through the legislative process.
Other questions? Yes.
I sort of, in general, with regard to the childcare, the impact of the changes in the childcare benefit. In removing the 2 adult, 2 children, 1 wage earner, I guess it's not really accounting for the fact that the other person in the household, they can still get childcare, so that's still an expense potentially, or treated as a public benefit, because they can be working towards the job, so they can be in education or employment programs. So it's more, I can sort of get more detail on that afterwards, but I'm not totally sure about removing that category, I guess.
And certainly the family configurations we would currently have don't account for all situations, even as it is.
As it is, yeah. Right.
Are you referring to the fact that like people have a need to still have an established need for care?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that I understood the justification for taking it out, that you thought that these kind of like would more merge towards the single, one-wage earner to children. I'm not totally sure that's a good assumption, I guess is what I'm saying.
Other comments or questions? Are people still feeling it's better to defer action?
I would love to, I'm sorry to give you more work. A summary of the current statute would be, and which probably exists somewhere on this committee's website, or maybe even is in front of me somewhere.
They're in Appendix B of the report.
Okay.
It's like this.
Cool.
We didn't get that. No, we didn't get that.
Oh, you didn't get that one?
No, nor did we get, well, we didn't have a link, but we do have it as an action.
So I just need to look at that before I feel like I have my.
Oh, wait a minute.
I thought it might have been.
No, it's not. That's a different.
Well, I think you did not cover it. No, you get it. All right.
It's listed on your webpage.
Okay, great. I will look at that. Thank you.
Yes.
But I would like to look at that before you vote.
And you will.
Me as well.
I just wanted to, I still would prefer to give it a little more opportunity. Okay, thank you very much. And then we'll get copies of the report.
Yeah.
So we're getting down to the final here.
Ready.
Yes, our clerk is getting ready to clerk. So what we have now are action items. And I don't know, since we did not, our action was not to take action, do we actually need to vote on that? Okay. So we'll now move down to the approval of the grants. And we'll start with number 3166. That is public safety. And anyone here to testify on that, or are we just? They're on Zoom. So we have Shannon Thompson and Lee Dorff. And this is to accept the grant, the FEMA grant. I don't know who wants to speak very briefly. I can't imagine we wouldn't approve it. So is it Shannon or Lee who's going to just give us brief oversight?
I can go ahead and provide an update. Lee Dorff, Director of Operations Planning and Development for the Department of Mental Health. So the funds are awarded directly to the Department of Public Safety, but then MOU'd over to mental health to execute the program. This is to provide education, outreach, and support to disaster survivors in impacted areas that received individual assistance declarations from the July flooding event. This is the initial round of funding, which is the immediate services program to cover expenses immediately after the event, followed by a next round of additional funding to provide support to Vermonters impacted for an additional 9 months after the immediate program closes.
This is obviously Shannon's here from Department of Mental Health. So do we have a motion to accept, a move to accept?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? And you'll notice we have, not for action, but there's some other information there. So unless there's further discussion, the clerk shall call the roll.
Senator Baruch, absent. Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lanford.
Yes.
Representative Schy.
Yes.
Senator Sears, absent. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
And Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Okay, it's
8-0-2. All right, moving on now to number 3167. This is to the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, DEC. And this is to complete the 2023 waste composition study and other initiatives. Oh, man, this is a real, put you right on the edge of your seat. So we have Josh Kelly and Tracy LaFrance. Do we have both? Or?
I think it's just me. I don't think
All right.
Tracy's here today.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. If you just give us a brief overview, we'll probably move this right along as well.
Sure thing. Happy to. I'm Josh Kelly, the Solid Waste Program Manager at the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. This grant from the EPA is bipartisan infrastructure law bill funding that was provided to every state in the country for basically recycling related purposes. The state of Vermont is using the funds for our primarily to start with our waste composition study, which we're statutorily obligated to conduct. This is a sorting through the trash to look at what's in it. We do it once every 5 years. That study is underway, and it tends to be fairly expensive, so this will help with that. In addition, we have other priorities for recycling that this grant addresses, both traditional recycling and food waste reduction and composting as well. So those other projects include a recycling systems analysis study, a reduction and reuse network that we hope to stand up, and then work with schools on what we're calling a School Materials Management Institute, helping them with their recycling programs and their food waste reduction, food waste separation programs.
All of that, cafeterias. Thank you. Questions?
No, I'm happy to move.
Okay, we have a motion.
3167.
To move approval of the grant?
Yes.
Second?
Second.
Senator Cummings? Further discussion? Not, the clerk will call the roll.
Good to see you, Josh. Senator Baruth absent. Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lanford.
Yes.
Representative Schy.
Yes.
Senator Sears absent. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
And Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
And we are 802.
So now we're down to grant number 3168, and it's $850,000 to Agency of Human Services, Department of Health. And we have Maria Cook here for the department. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm Maura Cook, Division Director for Health Promotion Disease Prevention at the Vermont Department of Health. I'm here about our diabetes grant program. This is a new 5-year grant cycle. This is funding we've had. We think it goes back 25 to 30 years in some form or another to address diabetes prevention and control. So this grant focuses on decreasing risk for those with prediabetes and then improving care for those with diabetes. It's funding that goes to all 50 states. And this one is unique in that they really want us focusing on specific populations. So the populations we're focusing on are older adults, BIPOC Vermonters, Vermonters with low SES socioeconomic status, and people with physical or mental disabilities.
Questions? No? Other than you'd like us to approve it. So I have a motion. Move approval.
I'll second.
All right. Senator Cummings moved approval, seconded by Representative Lanford. Further discussion? But our clerk will call the roll.
Senator Baruth absent. Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lanford.
Yes.
Representative Schy.
Yes.
Senator Sears absent. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Kornheiser.
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
It's 802.
Thank you very much, Maura.
Thank you.
We'll move on to number 3169, which is a donation of land. And do we have Gannon? Oh, here in person. Oh, okay. And it's in Sheffield and it's valued at $15,000.
Hi, yeah. Again, Osborne, I'm the Land Conservation Program Manager for the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. And at FPR, we're working to accept a donation of land, approximately a half acre as an addition to Holbrook State Park. Currently, the parking area that services Holbrook State Park is on private land out of the generosity of the private landowners. And we're working with them to subdivide that half acre parking lot and accept it as a donation, as an addition to the state park. It can then be used as a parking area for public access.
Questions? Oh, we should go on record as thanking the donors of the land.
Yeah, they've been very generous and great to work with throughout this process.
I'll move this.
All right. Senator Westman's moved approval, acceptance of the donation of land. A second?
I'll second.
Okay. Seconded by Representative Clinton. There's no further discussion. We'll call the roll.
Senator Baruch, absent. Senator Cummings?
Yes.
Representative Harrison? Yes. Representative Lamper?
Yes.
Representative Schy?
Yes.
Senator Cedars, absent. Senator Westman?
Yes.
Representative Wood?
Yes.
Senator Kornheiser?
Yep.
And Senator Kitchell?
Yes.
Okay, so we have 7 yes, 1 yep, and 2 absent.
All right. Thank you very much for coming in. And now we're down to Will Senning. Is he? Oh, he's here. And this is a grant of $645,655. So if you'll just give us a brief overview.
Sure, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Will Senning, I'm the Director of Elections.
A very familiar name.
Oh, yeah.
I've never
I know your face. I had the same reaction.
No, we always call. Yes.
Mostly with Rep. Harrison in the past, but yeah. A lot of you before. And I will say this really quickly, it's my first time doing one of these, so I hope we're prepared. I usually talk way too much. Rep. Harrison could tell you. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read this quick paragraph. That'll be the quickest way.
Okay.
I don't usually like reading, but that works.
Why don't you just say, please approve this grant?
I could do that too.
But I think for the purpose of would be very helpful.
This is it's known as the EASE grant, Effective Absentee Systems for Elections. It's administered by the DOD, specifically a program called FVAP, which is the Federal Voting Assistance Program. We've worked with them for a long time, for the past 10 years. There's a new grant funding meant to improve the voting experience for military and overseas voters. Focusing on ballot delivery, electronic ballot delivery, not return. We're just in the delivery phase right now. We had a debate here last year about return and decided not to go forward on that right now. $645,000 over 3 years. Basically, we've got a effective ballot delivery system right now, but this grant will allow us to upgrade to the next version of that software, put in some new features to that system, including, I think you guys would be interested, we're working on a voter guide, so that along with the electronic delivery of the ballot, these overseas and military voters can also get a nice description of all the candidates that
This will
are.
allow us to move our primary a little closer out of August, because the argument was overseas voting and the lead time because of the old technology. So I'm just wondering if, in fact, it allows us to revisit that. We pushed it forward substantially into summer, which some people thought had a depressing impact on.
Voting starting in June.
Yeah. So.
Good question. It is totally on point. That's a much larger discussion.
I know it is. I never want to miss an opportunity. So, getting back to the grant, other questions related to the grant? Yes.
So I'm intrigued by the voter guide. How would that information be filed? Would it be like a questionnaire that would go to candidates?
It's essentially an offer to candidates to submit a submission that would then be in the voter guide. Yep.
Well, for me, perfect candidate. I mean,
He's a good clerk.
I'll go around and file your papers, your petitions. You know, we're planning on giving you a web link where you can submit this information that will then be available to voters.
Huh, that's
It's
interesting.
a new initiative of the new Secretary Copeland Houns's.
thank you.
Other comments or questions? Now have a motion to accept the grant.
So moved.
All right, Rep. Cronin, seconded by Senator Cummings. No further discussion. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Baruch, absent. Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Representative Harrison, yes. Representative Lanford.
Yes.
Representative Scheid.
Yes.
Senator Sears, absent. Senator Westman.
Yes.
Representative Wood.
Yes.
Representative Pointheiser.
Yes.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Okay, 802.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming over.
As well.
So nice to meet you.
Yes. So now we have the fiscal officer's report, which obviously is going to be very truncated.
It's going to be very interesting. What I mainly like to do is introduce you to staff, changing the rules for our board, so you all can come up and you all know Emily Byrne, who is now the deputy, and Chris is taking over the revenue team. So Emily moved to deputy, he moved into the revenue team. And we are currently looking for transportation, and we're going to be posting positions for transportation analysts. And Amy Cook is going to be staffing Senate appropriations, and Scott is doing the legislative finance director, and includes the capital bill, and he is currently working on the legislative budget, which we will be taking to JLMC for approval there. So that was my quick introduction. I know you all have, some of you have another meeting very soon. So I don't know if you have any, and you've got the fiscal officer's report, it's about revenues and other work we're doing on pensions, which you're going to next.
I have a quick question. I'm so sorry.
Yes,
I really
go
want the
ahead.
meeting to end too. If a summer study committee recommends changes to your office, is there still time for your budget to be updated, or are we past that
Well,
point?
we would probably not just put it in the budget until it's approved by the legislature.
Okay.
So I think that, I'm thinking about your other committee. That would be my thought, is that that bill would, if some other, if our office were added to some dimension, that would be added through the budget process, or through this other, whatever bill.
And I would just also offer that while it's very important that we are fiscally responsible, I think sometimes we are more fiscally responsible when your office is fully staffed and everyone in there has the time to do what they need to do and the resources they need to do it. I think that's actually the most fiscally responsible thing we can do. I just did a quick scan of your budget, so thank you.
Okay. Is this all one document?
You just have a bunch of copies.
Yeah, I don't think.
Did it get?
Oh, it didn't make it all.
I didn't make it around. Oh,
I
okay.
want to say something has happened here because I seem to have quite a stack. Okay, so at this point, it is 12:30, and I am going to, unless there's further business, I'm going to authority to